Chapter 704. In any case, everything could only be decided after seeing the Yin Spring in the 60,000 mountains. Whatever the Empress decided, he would let her decide. In any case, Rinpoche was determined to train at the Earth Yin Spring in the 60,000 mountains. For the next few days, apart from attending classes, Rinpoche focused on training. After this breakthrough, his body had changed a lot. Both his strength and speed had been greatly improved, and he wouldn't be able to control his body if he didn't train. It was like a child holding a 50-kilogram broadsword. A broadsword was very lethal, but it was useless if one couldn't control it. Instead, it would be a burden. This was Rinpoche's situation. After training for 3 days, Rinpoche felt that he had improved his control over his body. He asked the Empress to call Tonglan to the palace to spar with him. The Empress was surprised by Rinpoche's request. This was the first time that he had taken the initiative to spar with Tonglan without being forced. How rare. It's not like you at all, the Empress said frankly. Your Majesty, you are looking down on me. Rinpoche laughed. After all, I can improve the fastest in high-intensity sparring. Sometimes, I recall the day when I woke up and went crazy from hunger. On the way to the imperial kitchen, I encountered 2 guards, but I was able to dodge them with ease. However, after I woke up, that feeling disappeared, and I couldn't even control my body properly. What do you think is the reason? The Empress looked at him and asked. Rinpoche pondered for a while and said, perhaps I'm the kind of person who becomes stronger when facing strong opponents. Only under pressure can I unleash my small universe. Originally, this talent was concealed, but it was awakened after I broke through to the earth will level. The Empress looked at him blankly. She was shocked by his words. After a while, she said, I roughly know what's going on with you. You are indeed worthy of being called Your Majesty. Even I couldn't detect it, but you detected it so quickly. Rinpoche was delighted to hear this. The talent that he had hidden for so many years was finally going to be unleashed. I did detect it. The Empress nodded. You did detect it. You actually became arrogant. You actually dared to take the initiative to spar with Tonglan. You could even unleash your small universe. That afternoon, Rinpoche wore Li Ning's shorts and stood on the court. Opposite him was the little Lolita, Tonglan, who was dressed in white. She looked up at him with a mischievous expression. On the other hand, the Empress was sitting on a chair, eating fruits and watching anime. Behind her were Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan. One of them was holding an umbrella while the other was preparing an ice basin and using a fan to blow cold air onto the Empress's body. Rinpoche felt a little excited. After being beaten up for so long, he could finally display his strength. With his extraordinary speed, he felt that he had a high chance of winning this time. He would definitely give the little loli a surprise. He could also improve his control over his body through battling with her. It was really several things in one go. Let me play some background music first. Rinpoche turned to the side and made a selection on the laptop. Immediately, the external interface started playing impassioned music. After that, Rinpoche realized that the little Lolita was even more excited than him when listening to this epic electronic music. Her little head was nodding bit by bit. You can relax. Anyway, I've never won before. Rinpoche said. The little Lolita looked askance at him and said, I've never been nervous before. Do you know what's the big problem I discovered after breaking through to the earth will level? Rinpoche asked. Not only earth will experts, but also Kismet heaven experts. What is it? Tonglan's attention was immediately attracted by his words. Even though she didn't give Rinpoche a good look, she was still very impressed by his knowledge. Even the Empress raised her head. It's much stronger than a man will expert. Rinpoche suddenly jumped up, crossed more than 10 meters in one step, and kicked straight at Tong Lan's face. Tong Lan stretched out her palm to block, but Rinpochen did a somersault in midair. His other leg moved like a windmill and directly hooked Tong Lan's jaw. The back of Rinpochen's foot collided with Tong Lan's palm and produced a loud bang. Then, Rinpochen was kicked away by Tong Lan. Rinpochen spun and landed at the side of the arena. He landed heavily on the ground, turned over, and got up. His face was no longer as relaxed as before. He could sense Tong Lan's kick just now, but his body couldn't keep up with his brain's reaction speed. The last time he met the Imperial Guards on the way to the Imperial Kitchen on a rainy night, he felt the same way. The brain's reaction speed was much faster than the body's. His brain had already sensed it and knew how to dodge it, but he couldn't dodge it and his body couldn't keep up. This feeling always made him feel very uncomfortable, as if there was a delay in his brain's command of his body. This situation was very difficult to detect during normal training, but it was extremely obvious during sparring. The following sparring sessions also confirmed this point. There were many times when he could clearly sense her movements, but he just couldn't dodge it. After being hit by Tong Lan more than 10 times in a row, Rinpochen felt that his body was about to fall apart before stopping today's sparring session. In any case, I've improved a lot. Rinpochen lay on the ground and panted. Tong Lan looked at him, raised her small face, and said, "Improvement. You are thinking too much. It doesn't exist." Rinpochen immediately made up his mind to double tomorrow's homework. Listening to the background music coming from the side, Rinpochen sighed faintly. Sure enough, he had never won with his own background music. After Tong Lan left, Rinpochen described what he felt just now to the Empress. The Empress frowned and pondered for a long time before saying with some doubt, "Under normal circumstances, such a situation wouldn't occur. Instead, it was difficult for me to recover my strength for a month after burning my essence blood. That feeling was similar to what you described. Under normal circumstances, a person's physical body and spirit are equivalent. The level of the physical body corresponds to the level of the spirit. This is the case for every martial art. The situation that you described gave me the feeling that the spirit had surpassed the physical body. For example, when you were originally at the man-will level, your physical and spirit values were 5. After attaining the earth-will level, one's physical and spiritual attributes would normally be 20. However, your physical and spirit values were 20, which is completely incompatible with your physical body. That's why such a situation occurred. It's like a 6-passenger car with 10 people in it. Take me for example. For example, my spirit value is 100, and my physical value is also 100. After burning my essence blood, my physical value drops to 30, but my spirit value is still 100. Under such circumstances, the body will not be able to be commanded according to my will. Rinpochen frowned. He could easily understand the Empress's explanation. To put it simply, it was like an Alto with a racing engine installed. A racing engine was naturally very good, but when installed in an Alto, it couldn't be utilized at all and would cause all kinds of problems. As for the reason, I guess it might be the influence of the visualization that you practice. According to your description, this set of cultivation method will indeed have an impact on the divine soul when cultivating. Do you still remember the second volume of the ancient scroll of methods? After practicing visualization, one can start practicing it after reaching the earth-will level. If one hasn't practiced visualization before, one can only practice it after reaching the spirit-will level. I'm afraid this is the reason. After listening to the Empress, Rinpochen felt that this was most likely the case. After pondering for a while, Rinpochen suddenly thought of something. If the spirit greatly surpassed the physical body after practicing this martial art, then the way of fighting should be different from ordinary martial arts, right? There should be a special way to use the spirit, right? 10,000 techniques. 10,000 techniques. No wonder it's called 10,000 Techniques. I'm afraid that the mystery lies here. In other words, he had to find a way to find the second volume in the future. Otherwise, wouldn't he become a level 60 spellcaster who hadn't learned any skills? Chapter 705. When Renbochin returned to the palace from the academy, he happened to meet Shurqing in front of the palace gate. In other words, Shurqing was waiting for him. Congratulations, Sir Ren. Shurqing's wrinkled face moved as he cupped his hands and smiled at Renbochin. Where did the congratulations come from? Renbochin rubbed his eyebrows. He had been busy recently and had been pondering about revisualization for a few days. The Empress had guessed that after practicing this technique, her soul would be far superior to others. In fact, her physical body wouldn't be weaker than others. The origin of this technique probably wasn't simple. Renbochin had been pondering about this for the past few days. In addition, he was wondering where to find the third volume. The first volume was in the Hao Nation and the second volume was in Great Xia. What about the third volume? In fact, apart from Renbochin, only Spirit Will experts could use this manual. This was because only Spirit Will experts had the strength of their souls. He should first find out the background of all the Spirit Will experts in the world, especially those with strange techniques. He might be able to find out something from them. Which Spirit Will expert was a nameless person? One could imagine how difficult it was to find out the background of all the Spirit Will experts in the world. In addition to this, there was another important reason: he had been having nightmares recently. Recently, he had been dreaming about the elderly version of Sister Feng several times and would wake up in a cold sweat. If this went on, he would wither before he could get married. There was a saying that what you think about in the day, you dream at night. However, he had been thinking about the ancient scroll of methods every day. Why did he keep dreaming about it? What kind of hatred did he have? Everyone minded their own business, so why couldn't you stay away from me? Recently, the entire court has been discussing Her Majesty's marriage. What are you worried about, Sir Ren? Could it be that you are dissatisfied? Shurqing's face darkened when he saw Renbochin's worried expression. Great Elder, you misunderstood. Renbochin immediately reacted when he saw that Shurqing was unhappy. All along, Tong Jinye and Shurqing had been the friendliest to him in the court. However, Tong Jinye, that old man, relied on his strength and would slap Renbochin to the ground from time to time as if he was smashing a mole. Looking at it this way, Shurqing was the only good person in the entire court. Renbochin didn't have much of a reaction even after tearing down his walls several times. No matter what, Renbochin didn't want Shurqing to misunderstand him on this matter. If others misunderstood that he was so worried about marrying the Empress, he was afraid that he would be stabbed to death behind his back. She frowned and hesitated for a moment before telling Shurqing about her troubles in the past 2 days. She mainly talked about the nightmare. I see. Shurqing stroked his beard and said, however, it is a great honor to be able to marry Her Majesty. There are millions of Aboriginal men, and which one of them isn't envious of you? How could a real man be a coward when it came to cultivation? Besides, it's the same in the dark. Renbochin squinted at Shurqing with a face full of hidden bitterness. Aren't your words quite down to earth? It was really easy to talk while standing up. I'll find you 6. Try turning on the lights. However, when he thought about it carefully, he really hadn't seen anyone that was too ugly in the Aboriginals. Actually, Aboriginal men weren't ugly. Rather, they were the valiant type, which suited the Aboriginals' aesthetic standards. As for Aboriginal women, they usually had strong and healthy bodies with excellent figures. Even if their looks were average, their wild nature had a unique flavor to it. As for ugly ones, he really hadn't seen one. This was probably the legendary talent of the race. Just like the legendary Yiksha, the men were extremely ugly, and the women were extremely beautiful. Although the Aboriginals hadn't reached this level, they had the same idea. Therefore, Shi Qing probably didn't quite understand what was ugly. Renbochin should find a few photos for Shi Qing to stick on the wall and see if he could still be ambitious every night. Did Sir Shi congratulate me just now? Renbochin immediately changed the topic and guessed. Shi Qing had been waiting for him here and congratulating him. He was afraid that the wedding date had been set. Although Renbochin had been pondering about the ancient scroll of methods recently, he also knew that everyone in the imperial court was studying his marriage with the Empress. Perhaps it was because the Empress was about to get married that she was at a loss. Recently, she often threw a little tantrum and threw a little tantrum. Although he found it interesting most of the time, he would occasionally have a headache. After all, the Empress wasn't an ordinary woman. An ordinary woman's small fists couldn't kill someone. Sir Ren, the wedding date between you and Her Majesty has been set. It will be on the 3rd of March next year, which is 9 months from now. After that, you will have to address her as a prince. Renbochin understood that it was exactly as he had guessed. 9 months. It should be the time for the Empress to go to the 60,000 mountains and for him to practice the yang boosting solution. Thank you for informing me, Great Elder. Renbochin took a deep breath and smiled. It's all right. I just want to tell you that Her Majesty is the Empress of Dao and the Aboriginals. Don't let her be sad, Shi Qing warned. She is also my Empress. Just like what you said before, millions of Aboriginal men are envious of me. How can I not appreciate my blessings? That's for the best. In fact, I don't have to be so worried. Anyway, you are no match for Her Majesty. Shi Qing laughed. However, I've been waiting for you not only to inform you about the wedding date, but also for another matter. Please speak, Great Elder. It's about the betrothal ceremony. We haven't been able to figure out what to do these few days and wanted to ask you if you have any ideas. After all, you are more knowledgeable and smarter, Shi Qing said. He then gave Renbochin a brief explanation of the Aboriginals' betrothal ceremony. Renbochin didn't know that the Aboriginals' betrothal ceremony was actually like this. They actually had to fight their way up. If a few big shots came to block the way, would he be able to exchange a few blows with each of them? Would he be able to enter the palace? He was afraid that the Empress would have to visit his grave. Even if he could really enter the palace, there was still the big boss, the Empress. If the Empress was embarrassed, Renbochin couldn't afford to get hurt. He immediately said seriously, actually, Her Majesty can marry me. I don't mind at all. When the time comes, you can just symbolically block Her Majesty. In any case, I definitely won't be able to beat her. How can this be? The Aboriginals have never had such a rule. Great Elder flatly rejected. Rules are set by people. If there is a first, there will be a second. Besides, who do you think I can beat? Renbochin spread his hands. If you are capable, find a few people that I can beat. Then, tie the Empress up and wait for me to collect her. Shi Qing frowned and sighed. I feel that you have a lot of ideas and are full of nonsense, so I asked you what you think. However, it is against the rules to let Her Majesty marry you. If I have a child with Her Majesty, what will his surname be? Will it be Ren or Qi? Renbochin asked. Of course it will be Qi. Regardless of whether it's a man or a woman, he will inherit the throne. Shi Qing answered without hesitation. It was just as Renbochin had expected. No matter what, if he wanted to inherit the throne, his surname couldn't be Ren. Even he felt that this was the case. Of course, he didn't care about this matter. After all, they would be his and the Empress's children. Of course, they could also return to Earth with the surname Ren and Dao with the surname Qi. Or they could have 2 more children and choose one with the surname Ren. However, Renbachien was a little skeptical because, according to his observation, the fertility of the Aboriginals seemed to be very low, far lower than that of the people of Great Siaa and the Yun Nation. For example, the commoners of Great Siaa and the Yun Nation could have 5 or 6 children. After all, there wasn't much entertainment at night and they had nothing better to do. However, the Aboriginals generally only had 1 or 2 children, and at most, 3. However, another interesting point was that the experts of other countries didn't have many children either. For example, the experts of Tianjin Basin generally had very few children. Unless they married 17 or 18 concubines and worked hard, they might only have 8 or 10 children in a lifetime. This situation made Renbachien speculate that the more powerful one was, the harder it was to have children. As a result, he wasn't sure how many children he and the Empress could produce. Chapter 706. Unknowingly, the Black Bamboo Academy had an additional ring of street lights. Electric lights were also hung on the beams of the classrooms and the library. The backyard of the Black Bamboo Academy was expanded again. In the distance, there was an additional courtyard that emitted black smoke all day long. In the courtyard was the most important and special equipment of the Black Bamboo Academy at present, the thermal power generator. Needless to say, the importance of energy was too great for science and technology. What was special was that after this thing was built, it would emit black smoke 24 hours a day, and a layer of dust would fall on the academy every day. Before this, there wasn't any dust on the ground. Fortunately, this thing was only used for testing and improvement. Renbachien planned to build a power station outside the city to supply electricity to Lon City. At the very least, there would be electric lights. Renbachien also had another plan, which was to place some LED screens on the streets of Lon City and play some teaching videos. He hoped to use this method to increase the literacy rate of the Aboriginals. At the very least, some ambitious people could learn through this method. When there were more literate people, there would be more readers for newspapers and books in the future. He still couldn't achieve universal education in Deo, but he hoped to cultivate more talents through this method. The prerequisite for all of this was to have a stable power supply. He couldn't always rely on himself to bring solar panels and batteries from Earth, right? Energy was the foundation of modern society. This was a top priority for Renbachien, and he had made a lot of preparations for this. Given the price of copper in this world, he was already prepared to use steel core aluminum wire. Then, a very serious problem appeared in front of him. There weren't any aluminum mines in Deo. Renbachien then took out the map and looked around. Finally, his gaze fell on the country on the east side of the map. Wealth, population, resources, salt, copper, iron, aluminum. They were all in his hands. It had to be said that sometimes, having a good neighbor was indeed a very comforting thing. Renbachien felt that his family had been busy preparing the vinegar, garlic, exquisite tableware, and napkins for the whole day. Then, he waited for Zi Donglai, who had gone to the neighbor's house to borrow crabs, to come back. Before that, he had more important things to do. Even if he followed the Empress to the 60,000 mountains, the place that only existed in other people's stories, it was unknown how vast it was. There were countless talents and treasures, as well as countless aboriginals and ferocious beasts fighting for survival space. It was a place where one could feel a wild aura just by hearing its name. The palace had been preparing for this trip for several days. After all, the journey this time was very long. Even if they rushed at full speed, it would still take more than 2 months to travel back and forth. If he wanted to enter the depths of the 60,000 mountains, it would take a longer time, so he definitely had to prepare more things. The guards accompanying him were winged cavalry warriors. It was said that this trip to the 60,000 mountains was to replenish the number of winged cavalry warriors. Now, there were only slightly more than 600 winged cavalry warriors left, which was less than half of their original strength. Besides the Empress and Renbachien, there were also Qin Yuan, Hong Luan, Lin Chaola, and the people from the imperial kitchen. As for the students in the academy, most of them had to stay in the academy to complete the modification of the train and the thermal generator. Renbaqian decided to bring along the 5 students with the best results. Upon hearing this news, many students in the academy lamented. After all, the 60,000 mountains only existed in legends to them. They had never been there before, so it was very attractive to them. Furthermore, following Her Majesty to the 60,000 mountains to see the world was much more interesting than listening to the robots' lectures and experiments at the academy. They didn't expect that only 5 people would be able to go, and that it would be based on their exam results. Most of them knew that it had nothing to do with them. Perhaps only the few people with the best results would have a chance. The top student in the academy was a girl named Shiryu, followed by Shirgan, Su Jianshan, and Gulai. These people were all firmly in the top 5. After that, it was Su Peng, Tong Lan, and Xiong Ji who were fighting for the 5th place. The others didn't have much hope. Don't worry too much. The exam this time is very simple. There are a total of 10 questions, 5 of which are multiple-choice questions and the other 5 are true or false questions. Everyone has a chance. Renbaqian smiled when he saw the students lamenting. Although he said this, most people still didn't have any confidence and could only resign themselves to fate. After class, Shiryu, Shirgan, and Su Jianshan were surrounded. Everyone's tone was full of envy and jealousy. You guys will definitely be able to go. Not only will you be able to see the world, but you will also be able to show your face in front of Her Majesty. Aren't you thinking too much? How can you show your face? You are just going to see the world. Shirgan chuckled. If there were more questions, it would be hard to say. However, there are only 10 questions, so everyone has a chance. If you are lucky, you can go. Su Jianshan was quite honest. That's easy for you to say. Everyone muttered. Where did they get so much luck? The next day, everyone was dumbfounded when they saw the exam papers. A group of people turned their heads and looked at Su Jianshan. You're so damn right. Even Su Jianshan was dumbfounded. Although everyone had a chance, that was only if they had similar results and didn't know 1 or 2 questions. They might be able to get it by luck. If one could only answer 1 or 2 out of 10 questions, then how much luck would one need to be able to answer them blindly? However, today's exam papers simply exceeded his imagination. It really depended on luck. 1. Among the people below, who is the blackest? 1. Lu Dehua. 2. Sun Honglei. 3. Guo Fuqing. 4. Osama 2. What was it like today 1 year ago? 1. Cloudy. 2. Rainy. 3. Windy. 4. Cloudy, rainy, windy. 3. Luck is very important. 1. Choose me. 2. Choose me. 3. Choose me. 4. Choose me. Everyone was dumbfounded after reading the entire exam paper. This was different from what they had learned. Who were those 4 people? Who knew what the weather was like today 1 year ago? The third question was even more straightforward. Luck was very important. Even the answers were the same. They had to rely on luck. The rest of the questions weren't much different. After reading the entire paper, no one could remain calm. One by one, they raised their heads and looked at Renbaqian in a daze. Don't look at me. Answer the questions, he said. What are these? Everyone was dumbfounded. Use your wisdom and imagination. I believe in you, he laughed. Everyone looked helpless. They closed their eyes and finished answering the questions. It didn't take more than 10 minutes for them to hand in the exam papers. I know you are wondering why the exam papers are like this. It's completely different from what you have learned, he said after collecting all the exam papers. What I want to tell you is that luck is very important, just like what the third question said. Most of the time, people have no choice but to rely on luck. Therefore, in order to avoid falling into such a situation, you have to master as much as possible so that you don't fall into a situation where you have to rely on luck. In fact, 8 of the questions have real answers, and the answers are in the books in the library. As for the other 2 questions, it really depends on luck. Some people have to do the same experiment 10,000 times before getting the result. Some people get the result on the first try. It's undeniable that this is the role of luck. In addition, luck has many more functions, such as allowing you to survive in various situations. For example, it allows you to always discover the most important things. There are too many functions of luck. In fact, Rinpoche was trying it out this time. When he was pondering how to find the ancient scroll of methods for the past 2 days, he suddenly thought of the bichi he had seen on Mount Liuzue. After seeing it, many things happened, and many people died. However, he was still safe and sound. He was convinced that although luck couldn't be seen or touched, it existed. Therefore, he wanted to see if he could pick out lucky people and see if they could encounter any opportunities in the 60,000 mountains. If it was useful, then he would really have to pick out a few lucky people. To find the second volume of the ancient scroll of methods for himself. Rinpoche looked at the dumbfounded expressions of the students, smiled, and flipped through the papers in his hand. Then, he stopped at a particular paper, and the smile on his face gradually froze. All 10 questions were correct. Not a single one was wrong. And the name on the paper was Du Lao Lu. Rinpoche pondered for a while and wondered if Du Lao's wife was a good husband. Chapter 707. July of the 72nd year of the Dayo calendar. The Empress's carriage left Lawn City again. There were nearly 1,000 people and dozens of carriages. There wasn't much food, mainly spices, daily necessities, and some other things. Rinpoche sat in front of the Empress's carriage with a bamboo pole in his hand. A water radish was hung at the tip of the pole, and he hung it 1 meter in front of Qi Shui, the Kirin. "Aren't you tired?" the Empress asked angrily. Rinpoche had been teasing Qi Shui for 2 days. At first, it was meat, then it was fruit, and now, it was a water radish that the imperial kitchen chefs brought out from the palace. Qi Shui had such a gentle temper, but now, it even raised its hooves when it walked. Rinpoche reckoned that it wasn't far from being kicked. "I saw that it doesn't like meat, so I thought that it might like to eat vegetables." Rinpoche smiled and stuck the bamboo pole on the side of the carriage. The water radish continued to hang in front of Qi Shui. During this trip, the Empress finally got Qi Shui out of the lake after a year to satisfy Rinpoche's curiosity. Rinpoche felt that it should have gills. Otherwise, it wouldn't have stayed at the bottom of the lake for so long. Even whales had to come up to the surface to breathe. However, Qi Shui had been underwater for so long that it was about to grow hair. However, after careful observation, Rinpoche decided to go back and find a rock to press on Darwin's coffin. Rinpoche returned to the carriage and picked up the second volume of the Ancient Scroll of Methods, to study. He had read it once when he first got it, but the first page exhausted his energy and almost fainted. After this breakthrough, it was much easier to read it again. Although it was still tiring, it was already within a controllable range. The second volume of the Ancient Scroll of Methods recorded 2 parts, the nourishment technique and the spiritual cultivation technique. The nourishment technique could be practiced at the earth will level and focused on nourishing and strengthening the spirit. The spiritual cultivation technique could only be practiced after the spirit will level, so he couldn't see the specific content. The words in this ancient scroll seemed to have a magical power. If one wasn't strong enough, they wouldn't be able to read the contents at all. Even if they flipped to the end of the page, they would feel as if all their energy was sucked into it. Only when one's spirit reached a certain level could they break free from this situation. After reading the contents of the first volume of this book, he felt that it was as he had expected. This set of martial arts focused on the spirit. In other words, his future was very likely to be a mage. The premise was that he could find the second half of the ancient scroll of methods. As for this spiritual cultivation technique, it was based on the perception of the 5 elements when he was cultivating re-visualization, to visualize the 5 elements and form a 5-element space. Then, through daily visualization, he would strengthen this space bit by bit, and at the same time, strengthen his own soul. It sounded easy, like playing Minecraft. However, it was very difficult to actually do it. Over the past few days, Rinpoche had repeatedly visualized the giant tree with the wood element, the lake with the water element, and the earth with the earth element. However, every time he relaxed a little, the visualizations would collapse and dissipate. He was completely unable to achieve the solidified reality described in the ancient scroll. As a result, Rinpoche had no choice but to give up on his visualization. Every day, he would carefully study and figure out the meaning of every word. The group walked for 7 days straight before stopping at a small city called Suyang City to rest and reorganize. The last time he broke through to the manual level, the time it took for him to travel was reduced from 3 days to 2.5 to 5 days. This time, the time it took for him to break through to the earth will level had indeed changed. Now, the shortest time he could travel was 2 days and the longest was 7 days. This made it much easier to arrange his time than before. Rinpoche finally felt a little more free, and it was much easier to arrange his time. He didn't have to calculate the day of his return all the time, and he felt less pressured. Rinpoche returned to Earth with the Empress. The Empress went to download a television series while he made arrangements for some martial arts centers. Now that half a year had passed on Earth, the development of the 2 martial arts centers that were overseen by the winged cavalry warriors was much better than he had expected. Even without any advertisements, the small videos that some people secretly shot and circulated within a very small circle had caused an endless stream of people to sign up for the martial arts centers over the past few months. After more than half a year, the total number of disciples in the 2 martial arts centers had exceeded 400. Moreover, most of them were young people from well-to-do families. What surprised him even more was that someone actually contacted him through the martial arts centers and wanted to hire bodyguards. "Brother, look, it's him. I've confirmed it. He's the one who wants to hire bodyguards from our martial arts centers." As soon as Rinpoche returned to Earth, Rinwanyan came looking for him and showed him a web page on his phone. "They wanted to contact you directly, but unfortunately, you weren't around," Rinwanyan said with some regret. However, he couldn't hide the excitement in his eyes. Those who could hire bodyguards weren't ordinary people. However, the other party had a higher status and was a well-known tycoon in the country. Rinpoche usually only saw news about them on the news. Now, the other party directly came looking for him. One had to know that their martial arts centers had been established for less than a year, and such a person had already come looking for them. How could this not make him excited? Rinpoche pondered for a while. This was also one of his goals for establishing a martial arts center. He originally thought that it would take a long time for the world to change for this trend to happen, but he didn't expect it to happen so soon. It could be said that as long as Rinpoche nodded, he could establish a certain level of contact with the other party through this method. Furthermore, with this first person, the reputation of his martial arts center would easily spread to certain circles, and it would be much smoother to develop again. Although Rinpoche had always been very confident in the martial arts centers, this was the trend of the future. However, he didn't care about being more famous. If the bodyguards of the world's tycoons were all disciples from his martial arts center, the influence would be obvious. To put it bluntly, he, who controlled the advancement of those disciples, also indirectly controlled the information and lives of most of the tycoons. Unfortunately, this opportunity came too early. If it was a few years later, the martial arts center might really be able to cultivate a group of manual experts. However, at present, he could only use that group of mountain kids. Renbochin reckoned that if he really sent the winged cavalry over, even though he would indeed establish a connection with them, this connection would probably be a deadly feud. Other than the Empress, only he could barely command them. If it were anyone else, they would be out of luck. Renbochin believed in the ability of this group of troublemakers and believed that there was nothing they couldn't mess up. After considering for a full minute, he regretfully rejected the other party's request. It was still too early. "Brother, are you crazy? You actually rejected?" Ren Wanyan asked incredulously. "They naturally came looking for us because we are valuable. What kind of people are we? How strong are we? Don't you understand after such a long time? There will be opportunities for such things in the future, but not now." Renbochin shook his head. This news was more of a surprise to him. What he was interested in now was how his small martial arts center entered the eyes of the other party. What Renbochin didn't know was that even without this martial arts center, he had already entered the eyes of some people. After all, the incident with the Wang family had caused quite a stir in some circles. Some people had already noticed him after understanding some of the unknown things inside. Furthermore, although the people that the nation had gathered were secretive, many of them were martial artists from the outside world. Furthermore, they were martial artists with roots in sections. After a few years, it was inevitable that some information would leak out and be discovered by some people. They were indeed tycoons, and in the eyes of ordinary people, they were existences that needed to be looked up to. However, the Wang family, which inexplicably collapsed, had a high status and strength, but suddenly collapsed without any ability to fight back. In addition to the Qin family, there was also a very powerful faction in the country that inexplicably collapsed. This was inextricably linked to Renbochin. When these two incidents were added together, it was more terrifying. Ordinary people couldn't detect it, but how could these people be simple? Many of them were omnipotent people, and it was inevitable that they would find out about some things through certain channels or clues. Subsequently, they found out about Renbochin. It could be said that Renbochin had long been marked in some people's hearts. He didn't need to think about how to build a relationship with others, but many people wanted to build a relationship with him. However, Renbochin rarely appeared. Other than some contact with the Qin family, he only had contact with the nation. He had always lived in seclusion, and those people didn't have the opportunity to get in touch with him. Therefore, the martial arts center became the only channel for the outside world to contact him. This time, it was also an attempt or perhaps a signal. After all, both parties weren't ordinary people, and it was impossible for them to come knocking on his door and say, "Bro, let's be friends. Let's go for a drink and get familiar with each other." Even if Renbochin sent an ordinary disciple over, this would be considered a response. Unfortunately, Renbochin didn't know about this and directly rejected the other party's signal. After knowing that he was rejected, the other party wasn't angry. Instead, he was even more certain of what he had learned. How could ordinary people reject them? Chapter 708. After returning from Earth, Renbochin and the Empress walked around the small city with great interest. Shuyang City was very small and had a population of only tens of thousands. It was the only city within a radius of hundreds of kilometers. Similar to other cities in Dayo, fights could be seen everywhere. People smashed the walls of other people's houses and were chased out. From a two-person fight, it turned into a three-person scuffle. It was very lively. Or rather, it was more appropriate to say that it was a chaotic scene. Curses like skin whipping could be heard incessantly. It was said that this was the dialect of a certain village. Renbochin and the Empress hid their identities and wandered around the city. They even deliberately went to the streets and alleys to read the Lawn City Daily that was posted on the bulletin boards to see if anyone was explaining what was written in the newspaper. Although it was called the Lawn City Daily, the newspaper had actually spread across more than half of Dayo. Except for the ones in Lawn City that were sold, the other places were directly brought by the caravans and posted on the bulletin boards. Renbochin had already treated this matter as the most basic way to enlighten the people and let them understand the outside world. Therefore, he didn't relax at all even though he was losing money. In addition, he also saw two familiar signboards in the city, the Imperial Shop and the Dayo business firm. The former mainly sold mirrors, glassware, and spices, while the latter was a shop of the Department of Commerce that temporarily sold soap, pumpkins, sweet potatoes, and potato seeds, as well as wooden chess and gamoku. Renbochin had to admit that this assistant who recommended himself was indeed very capable. He didn't have to spend too much effort in the Department of Commerce and only needed to control the general direction. The two of them walked around the city for half a day to get a look at the living conditions of the people in the city before setting off again. 5 days later. Your Majesty, that's Mount Liotsue. Renbochin said as he pointed to a mountain in the distance. The Empress put down the tablet in her hand and stuck her head out to take a look. Mount Liotsue was shaped like a bowl on the ground. It was said that there was a very powerful being in the belly of the mountain. The first emperor entered the belly of the mountain when he was at the Longevity Heaven realm and returned with serious injuries. After recovering, he led many experts to the depths of the 60,000 mountains and was never heard from again. Although it had been many years and the bones of ordinary people would have turned cold, the Empress knew that the being in the belly of the mountain wasn't dead. This was because it had already existed there for thousands of years before the first emperor. It was unlikely that it would die so coincidentally in just a few decades. The Empress had always wanted to go in and see what kind of existence it was. She also wanted to know where the first emperor had gone. As long as he knew where the first emperor had gone, he would be able to find out where the late emperor had gone. The Empress stuck her head out and looked at the mountain from afar. Her eyes flickered with radiance. After a long time, she retracted her gaze and said faintly, "In the future, I will personally go and take a look. Now is not the time. Perhaps we can get a robot to bring a camera in and take a look." Renbochin pondered. There's no entrance. The entrance from back then had collapsed long ago. We need to dig an entrance first. If we want to dig an exit, we will have to face it directly. The Empress shook her head. We don't have to get people to dig a hole. Maybe we can find a place to drill a hole, like a brine, the size of 2 fists. Then, we can use a small remote-controlled robot with a camera to enter. The Empress was slightly tempted. If she did this, there was indeed hope for her to see the existence in the belly of the mountain. After thinking for a long time, he said, "It sounds like there's a chance of success. It's a pity that we're in a rush this time. Let's talk about this when we get back." Okay. Renbochin nodded cheerfully. Looking at the mountain was like running a horse to death. They saw Mount Liotsue at noon, but it was not until the moon came out that they reached it. It was the place where Renbochin and the others had stopped before entering the iron mine at Mount Liotsue. There was a small forest and a small stream beside it. Renbochin jumped down from the carriage, stretched, and pointed to the darkness in the distance. He said to the Empress, "That's where I saw the Bichi the last time. It said that misfortune and fortune come hand in hand." The following period of time really did. First, there was an earthquake, and I was buried under a house. Then, I was attacked by a huge flower eagle. After killing it, I found a cloud crystal in its stomach. After returning to Lawn City, I was assassinated. Your Majesty had to bring me across thousands of kilometers to retrieve the antidote. On the way back, I was surrounded and intercepted by Great Xia. Fortunately, as the saying goes, misfortune and fortune come hand in hand. I'm finally safe. Although he had only been here once, he still had a deep impression of this place. It could be said that this was the starting point of a series of events. Later on, even when he was on Earth, he was first invaded by thieves and then forced by the Jean family. Too many things happened during that period of time, and it seemed that all the bad things had been squeezed together. Fortunately, after half a year in Deo, he was finally able to settle down. Calculating the time he spent in Deo and on Earth, it added up to about a year. Just one look and he was unlucky for a year. This thing was much more powerful than the god of misfortune. You also found an outstanding little white flower here, the Empress continued. Renbochin was stunned at first. He recalled what happened back then and immediately laughed. After laughing for a long time, Renbochin said, "When I saw that flower, I thought of your majesty and felt that it was very similar." After everyone had dinner, the Empress rested in the carriage. Renbochin sat in front of the carriage and told her about what happened the last time he was here. Inevitably, the beachy was mentioned again. Last time, it was attracted by the milk candy. This time, it's so far away that you probably can't see it. Otherwise, I would like to let your majesty see that beachy. It's quite a cute little thing. When the Empress heard what he said, she felt like eating something sweet. She took out a piece of chocolate from the box beside her, tore open the wrapper, and stuffed it into her mouth. It's better not to see it. This time, I'm just going to see my mother. I don't want too many twists and turns, the Empress said casually. Although she was also very interested in this kind of magical thing. However, the price that she had to pay was too high. That wasn't some kind of mascot. Not only would she not be lucky if she saw it, but she would also be unlucky. Just as the Empress tore open the second piece of chocolate, her gaze suddenly froze, and she struck Renbochin's side with a backhand. This sudden movement gave Renbochin a shock. From the corner of his eye, he saw a small thing flipping in the air to avoid this palm strike. Then, it landed on the ground, lowered its body, arched its back, and bared its teeth with a fierce look. Damn! Renbochin turned his head and was immediately shocked when he saw this little thing. It looked a little like a fox with a red body and a pair of fleshy wings on its back. The Empress frowned and looked at the little thing with a serious face. This is a beachy. Renbochin nodded in disbelief. Did this thing have a grudge against him? Previously, it was still fine in the mountains, but this time, at the foot of the mountains, it actually said that a beachy would arrive in no time. King ran faster than Chow Chow. Why is it here? The Empress's brows were tightly knitted. Just now, the two of them were casually chatting and didn't take it seriously. They didn't expect this thing to actually appear. The meaning of this thing gave even the Empress a headache. Chapter 709. Their actions alarmed the surrounding guards. When they saw that there was a small thing in front of the carriage, everyone was surprised and asked, "What is this?" "It looks like a beachy," someone said after carefully identifying it. After all, this thing had a special shape and was easy to identify. Misfortune and fortune come hand in hand. The surrounding guards were in an uproar. This thing was very famous. Even in the 60,000 mountains, it was extremely mysterious. Moreover, the meaning of this thing made everyone's head throb. However, the beachy didn't react at all to the surrounding people. It kept baring its teeth at the Empress, and the hair on its tail stood up. Renbochin looked at the beachy and then at the Empress with a headache. Why did this thing appear? He hadn't gotten the white rabbit creamy candy today. Only the Empress ate a piece of chocolate. At the thought of this, Renbochin carefully looked in the direction of the beachy's gaze and then at the carriage. He took out a piece of white rabbit creamy candy and tore it open. Sure enough, the beachy's gaze immediately shifted to him. Like a flame, it drilled into Renbochin's arms. He felt his vision blur and felt as if he had been kicked in the face. The white rabbit creamy candy in his hand also disappeared. The flame snatched the white rabbit creamy candy and disappeared into the darkness. Even though Rinpoche was an earth-will expert, he couldn't keep up with the beachy's speed. It seems like this thing was attracted by sweets again. Rinpoche didn't know whether to laugh or cry. How much did this thing like sweets? It was like this time as well. It's not sweets. The Empress shook her head. No. Rinpoche looked at her inquisitively. From now on, everyone must be vigilant, the Empress ordered the guards before speaking to Rinpoche. If it's sweets, there's honey in the mountains. Why would it come here? To it, this kind of candy might not taste better than honey. Plus, the smell of honey is stronger and can travel farther. Besides, the mountain people often collect honey, and this thing has never been attracted by honey. Rinpoche nodded. What the Empress said made sense. However, it only appeared after the candy was taken out both times. It's like this once and twice. It can't be a coincidence, right? Rinpoche was puzzled. You were there both times, the Empress suddenly said. Rinpoche was taken aback. Your Majesty, what do you mean? It's not necessarily because of the candy. Candy may be a little attractive, but it's only a little. It's impossible to be attracted by candy twice. Also, the smell of the candy wrapper is very faint. Although this thing's sense of smell is sensitive, it shouldn't be this sensitive. I think it might have something to do with you. In fact, you've been lurking in the shadows ever since you arrived here. That's why you suddenly appeared. I'm afraid it was the same last time. Rinpoche pondered for a while and had some doubts about the Empress's words. What do I have to attract it? I don't know. But if you want to know if it's true, it's very simple. Get someone to take the candy and leave now. Tear the paper 5 kilometers away and see if it will appear. As soon as the Empress thought of it, she immediately ordered 4 people to bring candy and leave in 2 different directions. After an hour, the 4 of them returned. Your Majesty, that thing didn't appear, the 4 of them reported. As expected. The Empress nodded her head in understanding. She then looked at the 4 of them and asked, what's going on with your bodies? Out of the 4 of them, 2 of them were stained with blood and the other 2 had some dust on them. It seemed like they had encountered something. The 2 of us encountered a pack of wolves. That's strange. Usually, wolves hate themselves for not running fast enough when they see us. They actually dared to surround us today, the 2 people at the back said. Wild beasts were actually very smart and could measure the strength of both sides. Just the murderous aura from their bodies was enough to deter wild beasts from approaching them. However, today was a little different. A rock rolled down from the mountain in front. If we didn't dodge quickly, we would have been hit. The other 2 people were surprised and sighed. This thing was indeed as evil as the legend said. The effect was immediate. Nothing happened after they set off for more than 10 days. However, something happened immediately after they saw that thing. The Empress and Rinpoche had the same idea. Even though Rinpoche had experienced it before, he felt that it was simply too coincidental. You guys can leave first. Remind the others to be careful even when resting. After the 2 people left, the Empress looked at Rinpoche, took out a piece of chocolate from the box, tore it open, and threw it out of the carriage. A fiery red light flashed, and the piece of chocolate disappeared without a trace before it landed on the ground. Sure enough, it's coming for you. It's following you in the dark. The Empress finally confirmed it. Seeing this scene, Rinpoche was speechless. Although he didn't know what it was doing, it seemed that the Empress was right. However, he was concerned about another matter. Your Majesty, you seem exceptionally wise and mighty today. Rinpoche looked at the Empress curiously. Do you think I'm usually not smart enough? The Empress glanced at him and sneered. How is that possible? To be able to govern Deo in such an orderly manner, your wisdom isn't something that ordinary people can fathom. I just feel that you rarely consider such trivial matters in the past, but you're actually so concerned about it today, Renbochin said. In fact, the Empress wasn't usually considered to be extremely smart. After all, the Empress's strongest and most proficient area was her martial arts. She definitely wouldn't think about things that could be solved with martial arts. As for governing the country, there were still the officials in the imperial court. However, the Empress today made Renbochin feel a little different. She seemed to be possessed by a primary school student. With just one look, she could actually guess that he was the target of that thing. And he didn't realize it at all. I'm just a little concerned, the Empress said. What should we do now? Renbochin looked at the darkness outside and asked. According to the Empress, that little thing was somewhere in the darkness, looking at him. This kind of feeling really made one's hair stand on end. That thing is too fast, and I can't catch up. Let everyone be on high alert and see how long that thing can follow us. As for what its purpose is, it will be revealed sooner or later, the Empress said. I'm afraid that there will be more twists and turns along the way. Renbochin had a headache. No one liked natural or man-made disasters along the way. However, given the extent of this thing's evil, it was really possible. Fortunately, even if the sky collapsed, there would be someone taller to hold it up. The Empress should be able to protect him, right? By the next morning, the news of the Beachy's appearance had already spread, and almost everyone in the team had heard about it. Even the 5 students from the academy ran to Renbochin excitedly to confirm. They wanted to know if this thing was really that evil. After setting out on the road, everyone was still on high alert at first. Fortunately, nothing happened. Half a day later, everyone arrived at a river. Just as the few winged cavalry warriors in the lead stepped onto the wooden bridge, they heard a cracking sound, and the wooden bridge under their feet started to shake. Oh no, run! The few winged cavalry warriors on the bridge were shocked, but it was already too late to escape. Crack! As if it had been in disrepair for a long time, the entire bridge kept making sounds. Then, it broke into 2 and collapsed. A few winged cavalry warriors kicked their mounts and leaped into the air. They were then caught and pulled back by the others. However, they could only barely escape. They watched helplessly as the jumping goats fell into the water and immediately set off huge waves. A crocodile that was more than 10 meters long popped its head out of the water and directly bit the jumping goats. Chapter 7:10. There were 2 types of Beachy. One was a Beachy, and the other was a Beachy. The former was gray, and anyone who saw it would be unlucky. The latter was red, and it was called misfortune and blessing. If there was misfortune, there would be blessings. Renbochin was stunned when he saw these crocodiles that were more than 10 meters long. He then remembered that he had obtained a cloud crystal from killing a flower eagle. Drag them out and kill them, Renbochin ordered. He felt that these monsters were here to give him equipment. Why? Just a few bone mines. The Empress looked at him strangely. These things could be seen anywhere there was a big river. Because crocodiles could bite the bones of their prey and roar like thunder, they were called bone mines in Deo. The Qin nation was also a place with many crocodiles, and they were called thunder. In Great Xia, crocodiles were called earth dragons. Let's see if there are any gains. Renbochin turned his head. Misfortunes and blessings go hand in hand. There should also be blessings in misfortune. The Empress immediately understood. At this time, a few winged cavalry warriors found 2 stones the size of a human head and threw them at the crocodiles. Boom! A few stones smashed into the crocodiles, but they were extremely strong. They were fine after being hit by the stones and only sank into the water in pain. This time, they couldn't hit them even if they wanted to. If they were on land, 8 or 10 of these crocodiles wouldn't even be enough to defeat one winged cavalry warrior. However, in the water, it was the complete opposite. Although the aboriginals wouldn't drown if they fell into the water, they were very clumsy and couldn't exert even 10% of their strength. Everyone was at a loss for what to do. Get out of the way. The Empress frowned when she saw that they didn't know what to do. Give me the arrows. The Empress came out of the carriage in a flash with a simple horn bow made of beast horn in her hand. It was the same bow that had been hanging in the carriage. Hong Wuan took out a quiver that contained more than 10 dark yellow bone arrows. The Empress pulled one out and knocked it on the arrow. She pulled the bowstring back 2 inches. She took a look at the river and loosened her fingers. The bone arrow made a strange sound and went straight into the water. 1 arrow was shot, and then another. 7 arrows were shot in a row. After the 7th arrow was shot, the river began to turn red. Then, a crocodile flipped out of the river, then a second, third. A pile of crocodile corpses piled together, blood flowing from the crocodile's jaws. The 7 crocodiles looked as if they had been blasted by a cannon. Each of their heads had a wound the size of a bowl. Quick, pull it up, Renbochin shouted. The winged cavalry immediately chopped down 2 trees and dragged the crocodile from the river to the shore. Each of these crocodiles was 12 to 13 meters long and weighed 5 to 6 tons. It required 2 to 3 people to pull them up. After bringing all 7 of them ashore, everyone followed Renbochin's instructions and opened up their stomachs. At first, Renbochin thought that there would be some gains. However, after everyone searched the place thoroughly, there was nothing except for the corpse of the jumping goat. Is there something valuable in the stomachs of these bone mines that we didn't notice? Renbochin pondered for a while. There was bezoar in a cow's stomach, pig's kidney in a pig's stomach. What was in a crocodile's stomach? Unwilling to give up, Renbochin rummaged through the pile again. Unfortunately, he still didn't find anything valuable. It seems like the so-called blessing and misfortune aren't so accurate. Renbochin was a little disappointed. Don't be disappointed so early, the Empress suddenly said. Renbochin immediately turned his head and asked, Did Your Majesty discover something? It seems like a big guy is coming. The Empress hooked the bow with her little finger and flicked it, causing the bow to spin in the air. Everyone, retreat. The Empress ordered. After the order was passed down, everyone left the riverside. The water churned, and a huge tree trunk floated up from the river. A huge crocodile floated up from the river. Its yellow eyes were filled with ferocity as it stared at everyone on the shore. What a huge crocodile, Renbochin exclaimed. A crocodile that was 12 to 13 meters long was already a huge monster. If it were on Earth, it would be a well-deserved giant beast. However, the head of the one that floated up from the river was almost as big as a car. It was at least 20 meters in length. Following which, the huge crocodile's chin swelled up. It didn't open its mouth, but a thunderous sound came from its body. Following this sound, the surface of the water began to roll outwards in circles. The Empress glanced at the crocodile and said, Killing the small one has attracted the big one. It might be the smell of blood. It's pretty strong. It seems to be at the Kismet heaven level. If we didn't discover it today, it wouldn't have any natural enemies in the river. Perhaps, it would have been able to grow. After saying this, the Empress raised the bow again. Previously, when she shot those crocodiles, the bowstring was only pulled back by 2 inches. This time, she pulled it back by more than half. The huge crocodile seemed to have sensed that something was wrong and immediately lowered its body. However, its fate was sealed the moment it popped its head out to check. The arrow suddenly left the bowstring and pierced through space without making a sound. The crocodile didn't even have time to react before the arrow pierced through its eye and went straight to its brain. Then, red and white blood spurted out from its eye. Following which, everyone heard the bowstring vibrate and emit a buzzing sound. Pull it up. The Empress threw the bow to Hongwon, who was behind her. This time, it took some effort to pull the crocodile up. This crocodile weighed at least 20 tons. Huge. When the crocodile was pulled up, everyone's first impression was that it was huge. It was simply too huge. It was simply a colossus. Previously, when they were in the river, Renbochin estimated that the crocodile was more than 20 meters long. Now that it was pulled up, Renbochin used his footwork to measure that it was at least 24 meters long, which was equivalent to the length of 4 to 5 cars added together. The corpse was lying on the ground and was actually as tall as a person. Dig it open. We should be able to gain something this time, Renbochin immediately ordered. Everyone flipped the crocodile over and stabbed its white belly with a knife. It was as if they were stabbing a rock, and it took them a lot of effort to dig open its belly. With the size of this crocodile, everyone would have to jump down to search for it. After spending some time, everyone cleared out the contents of the crocodile's stomach. Their harvest was a huge crocodile heart x1, a huge crocodile penis x1, a huge crocodile internal organs x1, a huge crocodile skin, a huge crocodile skeleton, and several tons of huge crocodile meat. However, there weren't any of the rare treasures that Renbochin had expected. Instead, everyone realized that this crocodile's skin was practically invulnerable. Even the winged cavalry warriors couldn't cut it with their knives. After feeling disappointed, Renbochin changed his train of thought. This crocodile's skin seemed to be a good harvest and could be used to make armor. As for the other things, there might really be something good. It was just that he knew too little about crocodiles, so he mistook these treasures for trash. Taking a step back, at least they would have dinner for the next few days. Although this crocodile was shot dead by the Empress as soon as it appeared, the Empress also said that this crocodile had the strength of a Kismet heaven expert. Such a powerful beast would be a great supplement even if it was used as food. Although Renbochin comforted himself this way, he still sent people to look for the crocodile's nest in the vicinity. Perhaps they could find something. Unfortunately, after searching for half a day, they still didn't find anything. It was already late, so everyone had to set up camp and send some people to cut down trees to build a pontoon bridge. Meanwhile, Renbochin cut a little of each of the crocodile's heart, internal organs, meat, tail glue, and penis to bring back to Earth. Since there wasn't any other harvest, they could only let the laboratory analyze whether this crocodile had any other value. After bidding farewell to the Empress, Renbochin got into her carriage and prepared to go back. In the past, he was always in his room or in a hidden place. Now that he was outside, he didn't have to be afraid to do so in the Empress's carriage. In fact, Renbochin wanted to try something else. If the Empress moved the carriage after he left, would he still be in it when he appeared again? After bidding farewell, Renbochin used his mind, and the surrounding air began to distort. At this moment, the Empress's expression changed. She saw a streak of red light plunge into Renbochin's chest. In an instant, Renbochin disappeared. Along with him disappeared, was the Empress's carriage, the thick fur that the Empress used as a bed, the table that held the fruit and wine jugs, and the boxes that held the clothes all fell to the ground. Qin Yuan and Hong Wuan were also caught off guard and fell, almost landing face first. The Empress landed in mid-air and looked at the empty surroundings and the many stunned winged cavalry warriors. Her face was cold and messy in the night wind. Just at this moment, a bolt of lightning split the night sky, followed by a deep rumble of thunder, "Your Majesty." The winged cavalry commander, Gongjing, stepped forward with a blank look on his face. He really wanted to ask the Empress where the carriage was. Why was the carriage gone? Chapter 7:11. Since the first time he traveled to Dayo, he had traveled back and forth at least 100 to 200 times. This was already instinctive to Rinpoche, and he didn't need to think too much about it. Often, the surrounding air would start to distort, and he would arrive in another world in an instant. Even after reaching the earth will level, this feeling didn't change. Only someone with the strength of the Empress could detect a difference. However, this time was different from the past. Rinpoche felt as if he was immersed in water, and his surroundings felt squeezed. It was as if the air was repelling him. This process only lasted for less than an instant, but he could clearly feel that it was as if that instant had been stretched out. Subsequently, he felt himself being squeezed out by something that couldn't be seen or touched. He then realized that he was still in the imperial carriage. It was just that the Empress was gone. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan were also gone. The bow hanging on the wall was also gone. The boxes in the carriage were also gone. Only he and the furry thing in his arms were left. The sky outside the carriage had turned from night to day. What happened? Rinpoche had yet to react when this question popped up in his mind. Subsequently, he felt the carriage tilt to one side, and he didn't know what was going on. Rinpoche's heart tightened. He didn't know what was going on, and he jumped out of the carriage in a flash. At the same time, a familiar shout came from below. "Don't hit me. It's Her Majesty's carriage." After jumping out of the carriage, Rinpoche took a good look at his surroundings. He was indeed on Earth, but he wasn't in a room, but on the roof. The group of people below hurriedly caught the Empress's carriage. If not for their sharp eyes, the carriage would have been turned into a pile of broken wood. The furry thing in Rinpoche's arms also moved. It sneezed a few times, then gave him a kick, turned into a beam of red light, and darted into the forest in the distance. Damn! Rinpoche was completely confused when he reacted. At that time, the Empress, Qing Yuan, and Hong Yuan were all in the carriage, but he brought it back. Where was the Empress? Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan. In addition, there was another serious problem. The Bichi actually followed him to Earth. Rinpoche rubbed his head and carefully looked at the forest behind him. The Bichi was nowhere to be found. Even if he could find it, he wouldn't be able to catch it. That thing was too fast. It was as fast as lightning. Not an adjective. Even the Empress might not necessarily be able to catch it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have suddenly rushed into his arms while he was shuttling back and forth. "Lady Boss, what happened?" More than 10 winged cavalry warriors asked as they looked at Rinpoche, who was standing on the roof in the cold wind. Rinpoche jumped down from the roof. He couldn't be bothered to answer this question and directly instructed, "Look after Her Majesty's imperial carriage. If there's any damage, I'll plant you in the soil and see if I can grow 10 more by next year." After saying that, he returned to his room and sat there in a daze for a long time, trying to sort out the situation. He was too careless this time. In the past, he had always been in his room or in the wild, so he had neglected this matter. He was traveling with the things that he touched and that he could move. He had even brought back straw from the prison and soil from the wilderness. Although the Empress's imperial carriage weighed more than 500 kilograms, it was now completely within the range that he could move, so he naturally brought it back. As for the Empress, Qing Yuan, and Hong Yuan, as well as the things in the imperial carriage, they were probably left in Dayo. The pressure that he felt when he shuttled back and forth was probably because the imperial carriage had overlapped with the walls and roof of the room, which was why it was directly squeezed out. This gave Rinpoche an important piece of information. Even if something was placed in the place that he left, when he shuttled back and forth again, it wouldn't overlap with those things. Instead, it would directly repel him. This greatly reduced the risk. After sorting out the situation with the imperial carriage, he began to worry again. The Beachy actually rushed into his arms and was brought to earth when he shuttled back and forth. Furthermore, with its speed, he couldn't catch it at all. This was Shanghai, and many people usually came up to this mountain. If he was seen by others, he would just have to wait to see the news. For example, the shocking discovery of a flying fox somewhere. These were all trivial matters. Or, someone encountered the arrival of the Grim Reaper and escaped unscathed, but the surrounding people suffered heavy casualties. This wasn't impossible. Renbochin had a headache thinking about the trouble that this thing could cause. After thinking about it, Renbochin felt that he had to think of a way to try. He opened the windows and let the cold wind blow in. At this time, it was early winter in Shanghai again. Renbochin found a pile of various desserts, tore open the packaging one by one, and placed them on the bed. The pile was like a small mountain. After waiting for a long time, he didn't see the Beachy appear. Even if it did, Renbochin admitted that he couldn't do anything about it. After pondering for a long time, Renbochin couldn't think of any good ideas. He simply turned on his computer and went online to search for ways to wait for it to come to him. Soon after, he found something good. Mouse board. As long as he put the candy on the mouse board, it would definitely fall for it as long as it came. It didn't matter how fast it was. As long as it stayed on it, it couldn't run away. Of course, an ordinary mouse board definitely wouldn't work. Although its greatest advantage was its speed, it wouldn't be as weak as a mouse no matter how weak it was in other aspects. It had to be specially made. For example, a metal plate could be smeared with super strong glue. Renbochin immediately called Shinfeng and asked her to find a way to get a mouse board that met his requirements and send it over tomorrow. After that, Renbochin ignored the pile of candy in the room, changed his clothes, and left. He felt that the little thing might be more easily fooled if he wasn't around. He would let it eat a little today to relax its vigilance and give it a surprise tomorrow. After taking the things that he cut off from the crocodile, Renbochin called 2 winged cavalry warriors to accompany him to the Messier 87 department. However, halfway through, Renbochin suddenly felt his body become weightless. Then, he and his car fell. In the eyes of onlookers, a sinkhole suddenly appeared on the ground with Renbochin at the center. Not only Renbochin, but the 2 cars behind him also fell because they were too close. Renbochin's car was at the bottom. Renbochin finally experienced what it felt like to fall into a sinkhole at a speed of 60 km per hour. In addition to the free fall, there was also the impact of crashing into the wall of the sinkhole. Then, another car directly smashed into his head. A series of events happened, and the sudden changes almost stunned Renbochin. The airbag directly protruded from the front and firmly pinned Renbochin to his seat. When Renbochin tore open the airbag and climbed out of the car, he saw 6 or 7 men and women coming out of the 2 cars behind him. They gave him a strange feeling. In such a situation, an ordinary person would first look at the surrounding situation and think of a way to climb out, right? However, the other party was still dizzy when they climbed out of the car, but the moment they saw Renbochin, they locked their eyes on him. One of them covered his collar and said, "We have fallen into a sinkhole with the target. Please give us instructions." The voice was very soft, but with Renbochin's extraordinary hearing, he could hear it clearly. The other party was coming for him. After that, Renbochin realized why he felt strange. It wasn't just the other party's reaction, but also their temperament. Although they looked similar, they weren't Chinese. "Do it." The first sentence was shouted by the other party. Chapter 7:12. Do it. Keep them alive. Following Renbochin's words, a loud bang was heard. The deformed doors of the car that was squeezed at the very bottom flew out. Two burly men in sportswear came out of the car with grins on their faces. The people opposite them looked cautious. One of them took out a palm-sized dagger from his waist and pointed it at the winged cavalry warriors. Looking at their reaction, Renbochin felt like he was using an atomic bomb to kill mosquitoes. After so much effort, you guys only took out these little things. Are you kidding me? These things can't even kill a chicken, right? At least, they can't kill a chicken in Dayo. 4 people from the other side held daggers and surrounded the 2 winged cavalry warriors while the other 3 approached Renbochin. Don't kill them. Renbochin warned the winged cavalry warriors again. Looking at the small daggers in their hands, he began to feel that he was making a fuss over nothing. However, the other party was indeed coming for him. This was true. What he didn't understand was why the other party had taken out these small daggers. Did they really think that he was an ordinary person? If he was an ordinary person, the other party wouldn't need to use weapons, right? Renbochin felt strange and a little funny. He didn't feel nervous at all as he watched the other party approach. Renbochin could slap them to death with one slap. Even a 40-meter-long broadsword would be useless, let alone a dagger. Then, Renbochin saw something shoot out from the side of the dagger that the other party was pointing at him. It was very small, very hidden, and most importantly, it was very close at only 2 to 3 meters away. Without thinking, Renbochin moved forward instead of retreating and inserted himself into the gap between the 3 men. He then kicked one of them in the stomach and punched the other 2 in the chest. The distance was too close. Although he couldn't completely dodge them, he was able to prevent them from hitting his vital parts. The 3 of them didn't even have time to react before they spat out blood and slammed into the wall of the pit with horrified gazes, falling down limply. Renbochin also felt a tingling sensation from his left shoulder and right rib. It's actually a gun that looks like a dagger. Renbochin immediately denied this idea. No, it's not a gun. Renbochin picked up a dagger from the ground and saw that there was something that looked like a trigger at the bottom of the dagger. It was just that he didn't notice it because the other party's finger had blocked it just now. On the side of the dagger's guard, there were 2 small holes. What's this? Renbochin was a little puzzled as he held the dagger. What was this thing used for? He looked up at the other 2 sides and saw that the 2 winged cavalry warriors had also finished off their opponents. Although the opponent seemed to be holding a weapon, the lethality of the weapon was so low that it made one's hair stand on end. Especially when it was in their hands. Renbochin felt that they were playing house with him. At this moment, Renbochin suddenly felt dizzy. Oh no, it's a knockout drug. No, it's a tranquilizer gun. Renbochin immediately reacted. Fortunately, I brought 2 winged cavalry warriors with me. Just as this thought popped up in his mind, he heard someone beside him say, "Strange, why do I feel a little dizzy? What a coincidence. I'm a little dizzy too. The last time I felt this way was when someone hit me in the head with a stick. I haven't felt this way in a long time." The 2 of them chatted and exchanged their thoughts. Renbochin was speechless. This bunch of idiots is unreliable. Renbochin was almost angered to death by the 2 of them. He could only rely on himself now. Should I go up and wait for help or return to the car? Logically speaking, the people from the Messier 87 department should be behind him, right? However, it had been a few minutes since the accident, and the people from the Messier 87 department hadn't shown up yet. Since the other party dared to make a move, he was afraid that the people from the Messier 87 department were being held up. At the thought of this, Renbochin immediately felt that it would be safer to return to the car. As long as the people from the Messier 87 department came, he would be safe. Although he felt dizzy, many thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. However, when he returned to the side of the car, his body couldn't take it anymore. He only managed to stretch his upper body into the car before passing out. He didn't know that this tranquilizer gun could even put an elephant to sleep for 3 hours. No one had ever been able to last more than 5 seconds. They usually passed out after 1 to 3 seconds. However, he lasted for nearly a minute. After another 2 minutes, a car arrived at the scene. 3 people got out of the car and jumped into the pit. At this time, there were already 5 or 6 cars parked around and talking on the phone. However, these 3 people didn't pay any attention to the situation in the pit. They looked surprised, especially the 7 men who were spitting blood and lying limply on the ground. "What about them?" one of them asked hesitantly. When they rushed over, they didn't expect such a situation at all. "This is an important matter. The target is more important," another person said. "Take the target away. Let's go." The 3 of them pulled Renbachian out of the car, dragged him to the road, and stuffed him into the car before driving off. Meanwhile, the 5 or 6 cars were still calling the police. Now, not only had an accident occurred, but it had also become a kidnapping case. In any case, the target is in our hands. As for them, let's wait for the higher-ups to think of a way to exchange them. After getting into the car, one of them sighed. "The mission isn't over yet, so we can't let our guard down. We have to send him to the target location. They won't be able to hold on for long. Very soon, the people from China will catch up. We're ready. Turn right at the intersection 600 meters ahead. There's a tow truck there. Put the car in and change to another one. There aren't any surveillance cameras there, so we should be able to delay them for some time. Hopefully, this will last longer." After saying that, the man angrily said, "Damn China, there are surveillance cameras everywhere." Then, he suddenly felt weightless. Before he could react, there was a strong impact. By the time the 3 of them climbed out of the car in a daze, they found themselves in a pit. Damn China's roads. Aren't they construction maniacs? Why is the quality of their roads so poor? This is their most prosperous city. Yet, there are pits everywhere. One of them cursed angrily. This mission was simply driving them crazy. Halfway through tracking, they fell into a pit and went from tracking to kidnapping. However, when they kidnapped the target, they thought that they had to worry about the other party's pursuers. In the end, the other party didn't come, and they fell into a pit again. Moreover, it was a pit that suddenly appeared. "Governor, you go and stop the car. Gatlin, you and I will drag them up." Another person frowned and tried to get out of the situation. The most important thing now was to deal with the pursuers. As for the damned quality of China's roads, it was none of their business. A moment later, the 3 of them dragged Renbachian into a polo that they had just stolen. "Thank you, China. There are people and cars everywhere," the strong man who was addressed as the governor said in relief. "If we were in other countries, we might not even see a passing car for half an hour. All right, although there was an accident, the intersection is just ahead. I can see it. Hopefully, everything will go smoothly." Before he finished speaking, they felt the familiar sense of weightlessness, and the familiar impact. "I will never use things from China again." Gatlin roared angrily with his head bleeding. It was still the same familiar surroundings, and the same big pit. "It's not far. Carry him," the leader ordered. The 3 of them carried Renbachian and ran wildly until they reached the intersection. "Be careful." Gatlin suddenly roared and leaped to the side while dragging Renbachian. The heart-wrenching sound of tires rubbing against the ground, the wind blowing past their faces, and the sudden splash of flesh and blood could be heard. Chapter 7:13. Governor. Gatlin's eyes were wide open, and his face was filled with pain. He had been on so many missions and survived no matter how dangerous the situation was. He didn't expect to die like this in China. being hit by a car that went out of control. After the car killed the governor, it smashed through the wall next to it and crashed into another building before stopping. This also confirmed that it was indeed a car that went out of control. The ear-piercing screeching sound at the beginning and the route that the car took proved this point. The other man's eyes flashed with sorrow. "Let's go, Governor." Gatling looked ferocious. "We can't care anymore," the other man growled at him. "Don't forget what we are here for. Now that the target is in our hands, we must send him away to complete our mission." Gatling gritted his teeth and quickly calmed down. The two men carried Renbochin and continued to rush to the predetermined location. They braced themselves and kept an eye on their surroundings, fearing that something would go wrong again. Too many things had happened during this short journey today. It made them wonder if they had been abandoned by God. They hoped that God would bless them and that nothing would go wrong for the rest of the journey. However, Gatling suddenly fell to the ground when he was 50 meters away from the destination. Renbochin's head fell to the ground along with him. "Gatling." The other man was shocked. "I sprained my ankle." Gatling got up from the ground with a bitter look on his face. He tried to land on his feet, but the pain made him break out in a cold sweat. However, he still stood there steadily. "Can you make it on one leg?" the other man said as he carried Renbochin on his back. Although he had suffered some injuries when he crashed into the pit, his clothes were soaked with sweat after carrying Renbochin, who weighed more than 100 kilograms, for such a long distance. However, he had no choice now. Even if it meant death, he had to send the target to the predetermined location. Fortunately, there were no problems during the last few dozen meters. A box truck was parked there, and there was no one in it. The trunk was originally meant for the previous car, but it was no longer necessary. In front of the truck was a very ordinary Volkswagen Jetta. The two of them stuffed Renbochin into the trunk and drove toward the beach. The two of them were on tenterhooks as they drove, afraid that they would fall into a pit again. Fortunately, the journey was smooth, and they quickly boarded the speedboat. There were two more people waiting, and when they saw the two of them coming with their target, they quickly set sail. In 20 minutes, they would be able to leave the territorial waters and enter the international waters in 3 hours. They had only sailed for a dozen nautical miles when two corvettes followed them from afar and kept trying to radio them to stop and inspect the ship. However, the speed of the guard boat was much slower than their speedboat, so it didn't take long for them to shake it off. Seeing that the corvette behind them had shrunk to a small dot, the few of them felt relieved. When they turned their heads and saw that Renbochin was still unconscious, they felt relieved. "Keep an eye on him. I'm afraid this guy is an expert in unarmed combat." The 7 people at the scene were all seriously injured, and 3 of them were probably injured by him. Moreover, they were under the effect of anesthesia. He probably knocked them down in an instant. "If he wakes up, the speedboat is so narrow, and the few of us may not be his match," the man who brought Renbochin all the way said. "Being tied up so tightly, what can he do even if he wakes up? It's almost time to give him a first aid injection. If an accident happens, we won't be able to account for it. After all, we paid a huge price to catch him." Another person took out a miniature syringe from a box on the boat and prepared to give Renbochin an injection. This kind of anesthesia was very powerful, but it was also very harmful. Without a first aid injection, the person who was shot could easily die from paralysis. "Can you speak Mandarin? Also, what's in your hand?" At this moment, Renbochin, who was still thought to be unconscious, suddenly opened his eyes and spoke, giving them a shock. "How is this possible? With this dosage, even an elephant would need to sleep for an hour, and a normal person would need to sleep for at least 6 hours." The few of them were shocked. Calculating the time, it had only been 1.5 hours, and he had actually woken up. Renbochin was tightly tied up. When he opened his eyes, he first looked around. It was very bumpy, and he was on the sea. He already knew this before he opened his eyes. There were 4 people near him, a brown-haired white man with a cigarette in his mouth, a blonde white man, a brown-skinned man who looked like a South American, and an East Asian man. The few of them seemed to be shocked. As for his own environment, he was very clear about it. He was tied up tightly and was even mounted on a speedboat. If he was normal, he reckoned that he would be in a prison cell or a laboratory in a few hours. Unfortunately, he wasn't normal to ordinary people. He had too many ways to escape. At worst, he could directly return to Deo and bring the Empress back. No matter where he was or how many people there were around him, as long as the Empress was around, these people were like raw pork on a chopping board. In this kind of situation, he naturally couldn't feel nervous. Who are you people? Where are you taking me? What do you want to do? Ren Bachin asked unhurriedly. Hello, Mr. Ren. You will understand who we are in the future. As for where we are taking you and what we want to do, you will also understand when you reach the place. For your safety, I hope you will be quiet and not move, the blonde white man said in fluent Mandarin. Although the target had already woken up, this surprised him. However, in this kind of situation, it didn't matter even if the target woke up. He was like a fish on a chopping board and couldn't do anything. Surprisingly, Renbachin and the other party had the same thoughts when they looked at each other. Renbachin pondered for a while and now had 2 choices. The first was to kill the other party and then drive the speedboat back. However, it was troublesome to be constantly being targeted. As for the second choice, it was to follow the other party to their nest and then wipe them out in one go. After 30 seconds of careful consideration, Renbachin made up his mind. Of course, he would choose the first option. The other party was most likely an agent of that Western country. So what if he went to their nest? Could he still kill their president? He reckoned that they would directly lock him up in the laboratory. There were many tricks on Earth that were indeed impossible to guard against. Just like this time, the other party used a dagger with anesthetic bullets, and he was actually defeated by 3 people due to his carelessness. Even if he fought them barehanded, he could still defeat 100 of them. The most important thing was that he was waiting to get married. How could he have the time to talk nonsense with them? Therefore, Renbachin immediately made the most cowardly choice. As for the other party's thoughts, let them be. In any case, the other party would at most give him some trouble. As long as they still wanted the things in his head, they wouldn't kill him. After making up his mind, the rest was easy. Gentlemen, this is China. I hope you can state your intentions. Otherwise, you will be arrested for espionage and kidnapping, Renbachin said unhurriedly. Ha, ha. Kid, if you can do it. Another East Asian grinned and laughed. He then got up and moved to Renbachin's side. He looked at him with a teasing expression and said, perhaps you should understand your current situation. Chapter 7:14. If Renbachin hadn't fainted, he would have known this East Asian man's nickname, Gatling. Of course, this did not mean that the other party was like a storm in other aspects, but that his mouth was like Gatling's. Only a few people could calm him down. However, to Renbachin, it didn't matter what his name was. He wasn't interested in remembering the names of dead people. Renbachin tilted his head and took the initiative to meet Gatling's fist. Crack! The sound of bones breaking could be heard. Ah! Gatling let out a blood-curdling scream. They shivered and even took out their guns. Renbachin looked innocent and said, he did it. Damn it, this guy's head is like a rock, Gatling cursed and raised his leg to kick him. Crack, this time, Gatling was holding his hands and feet and screaming. Renbachin sneered in his heart. He couldn't beat the Empress, but even if he was tied up like this, he still had 100 ways to make an ordinary person unable to take care of himself for the rest of his life. Only after breaking through to the Earth will level would he know how big the gap between an ordinary person and an Earth will expert was. Damn it, behave yourself. The South American pointed his gun at Rinpoche. Or do you want to die? Even a fool would know that Rinpoche was up to no good. Rinpoche continued to look innocent. Was it wrong for me to be beaten? I can only say that he is too weak. His soft fists are like tofu. Not only him, but all of you are the same. Why did you choose such a person? Do you want me to introduce 2 experts to you? Shut up. Did I tell you to behave yourself? That man looked ferocious. Even though Rinpoche was tied up tightly, he was still able to shrug his shoulders and keep his mouth shut. You are really stupid. That man scolded Gatling again before returning to his seat. Gatling looked at Rinpoche with a vicious look in his eyes. His lips kept opening and closing as he cursed silently. If the higher-ups didn't want him alive, he would have killed this bastard right now. Don't be provoked by him. He is our mission target. As long as we send him to the destination, our mission will be completed, the blonde man said. As soon as he said that, a dolphin suddenly jumped up from the bow and collided with the speedboat. The dolphin was sent flying before it could even let out a cry. In fact, because many fishermen would feed the dolphins, they would often chase after the fishing boats to play, and getting hit by them would also happen. However, it was still frightening for it to suddenly jump out and collide with the speedboat. The ship also shook violently, swaying from side to side and almost overturning. Gatlin, who was sitting on the side with one hand and one foot, screamed and was directly thrown out. Damn dolphins! The brown-haired man cursed as he turned the speedboat around and returned to the struggling Gatlin. Catch! The South American man tied a lifebuoy with a rope and threw it to the side of the Gatling. Rinpoche saw that the South American man had his back facing him, the brown-haired man was steering the speedboat, and only the golden-haired man was looking at him. He immediately knew that his opportunity had come. Out of the 4 people just now, at least 3 of them were able to pull out their guns immediately. If he killed one with his golden spear, the others would turn him into a sieve. Golden spear. Rinpoche looked at the golden-haired man and called out in his mind. Then, a spearhead emerged from Rinpoche's head. Rinpoche looked like a calabash. The golden-haired man was stunned when he saw this scene and asked incredulously, "What's this?" "Kill him." Rinpoche ordered in his mind while calling out, "Metal chain, tie up the other person." The golden spear was speechless. It retracted without saying a word. The spearhead retracted, and another metal chain emerged from Rinpoche's head. The first 3 sections were bent like a snake's head, and it looked around before retracting as well. Damn! Rinpoche almost vomited blood. These 2 cowards. It was rare for them to be useful, but they were actually terrified. Ha! Terrified at this time. The 2 of you are simply deceiving me. I have worked so hard to raise you for so many years, but now that I need you, you are actually terrified. The golden-haired man rubbed his eyes in disbelief as he saw a spearhead and a metal chain emerge from Rinpoche's head. He stammered, "The Jingu Bang." In his memory, the only thing he could think of was the Jingu Bang. Although it didn't look like it. What happened? The other 2 were alarmed by his voice and turned to look. A rod and a metal chain emerged from his head. The golden-haired man said in disbelief. Then, the 2 of them looked at Rinpoche suspiciously and then at the golden-haired man as if they were looking at a fool. A rod and a metal chain emerged from his head. However, to be on the safe side, the South American man still came over to check on Rinpoche. There were no abnormalities. As for the rod and the metal chain, they probably only existed in the golden-haired man's imagination. Dentist, apply to see a psychiatrist when you go back, the brown-haired man said. I really saw it, the golden-haired man said anxiously. You are probably under too much psychological pressure. Recently, there have been too many missions, and you should take a break. We carried him onto the boat, and he didn't have anything on him. Capoeira also just checked him again, the brown-haired man said. Well, maybe you are right, the golden-haired man said in distress. Even he felt that it was impossible. Maybe it was really an illusion. Gatling was dragged back onto the speedboat, lying on the ground, and spitting out a few mouthfuls of water. The torment just now had exhausted him, especially since he was now disabled. It's time to leave. Those guard boats may still be behind us, and we will be caught up if we delay any longer. The brown-haired man said as he started the speedboat. At the same time, he turned his head to look at the sea and frowned. The blood of that dolphin seems to have attracted sharks. Sit tight. Then, the speedboat quickly moved forward. To be honest, everyone was a little worried just now. Although they weren't in China's territorial waters, they were in China's economic waters, and the other party could catch up at any time. Now that the speedboat had set sail again, everyone was finally relieved. However, before they could sail for more than 3 nautical miles, they felt the hull shake again, and the entire boat flew out of the water. Everyone quickly held on to the places around them that they could hold on to, and Renbochin happened to be stuck in his seat. Just now, the bottom of the boat had directly hit the upper part of a whale shark, directly breaking it open, and the speedboat was directly sent flying. Ah! Gatling's trembling voice came from the air, and they saw him being thrown out again. The few people on the boat had just calmed down from the shock, and their faces darkened when they found out that he had been thrown out again. Why was it another collision? How could they collide twice in such a huge sea? And why was it you again? How could you fall down twice in such a short time? The brown-haired man had no choice but to turn the speedboat around to pick up Gatling again. The golden-haired man, who was called Dentist, suddenly said to Renbochin, "You are loved by God." What? Renbochin didn't hear clearly what the other party said. Dentist, on the other hand, had a bitter look on his face as he drew a cross on himself. After catching the target today, he finally understood one thing when he linked the series of events together. There were really people in this world who were loved by God. For example, this person in front of him. Since the beginning of the operation, not a single place had been smooth. They had been affected by all kinds of accidents from the beginning to the end. Chapter 7:15. If there were any enemies in the world that were the most difficult to deal with, it would be those whose God was always on their side. You could defeat a strong person or a smart person, but you couldn't defeat a person who was wrapped in luck. Because they would always turn danger into safety. And everything you did would become a wedding dress in the end. Just like the protagonists in those novels. That was what Dentist was feeling now. Ever since he caught the target, luck seemed to have turned away from them, and bad luck came one after another. This made him a little afraid. He had undergone a long period of rigorous training, but it didn't allow him to defeat people who were shrouded in the gaze of God. What nonsense are you talking about? The brown-haired man scolded in a low voice as he drove the speedboat around the sea to pick up Gatling. You didn't see what I experienced. You don't know how it felt when a sinkhole suddenly appeared on the road several times in a row. You also don't know how I felt when I saw the governor being hit by an out-of-control car. Look, Gatling has fallen into the sea twice now. Why? So many coincidences. Dentist's face twitched as he shouted. Yes, they are coincidences. We will complete the mission soon, the brown-haired man said matter-of-factly. Do you believe that such coincidences will happen again? Dentist roared angrily. We'll talk about it when the time comes, the brown-haired man said indifferently. Then, he looked at the sea, and his expression changed dramatically. Oh no! The South American man called Capoeira noticed it earlier than him, and his expression was even worse. They saw Gatling's face full of terror, shouting something and struggling non-stop. The seawater around him seemed to be boiling as if it was stirred by something. The culprit of all this was the dorsal fin that occasionally appeared on the surface of the sea. It was a shark. Hurry up! Hurry up! Capoeira kept urging. The speed of the speedboat was very fast, 60 knots per hour. However, it was precisely because of its fast speed that it had thrown Gatling too far away. It would take at least 3 minutes to go around in a big circle to get back. These 3 minutes had decided Gatling's life and death. When they rushed back, several sharks were taking turns to attack Gatling. Like a cavalry charge, they repeatedly charged at him. Blood dyed the seawater red. Gatlings and the whale sharks. Catch it, come up! Capoeira threw the swimming ring over. The swimming ring landed in front of Gatling, but Gatling stretched out his hand, but he had no strength at all. In the end, he could only shake it helplessly and was dragged into the water by a shark. D*mn it, D*mn it, D*mnb** starred. Capoeira kept shooting at the sea with his gun, his eyes bloodshot. Although Gatling wasn't likable, he shouldn't die here at this time. Complete the mission. Do you really think we can complete the mission safely? The governor and Gatlin are finished. Dentist seemed to be laughing and crying at the same time. What nonsense are you talking about? If you keep babbling, I'll kill you first. Now, shut up and sit down. When you get back, you can apply for your resignation. The brown-haired man cursed loudly. Renbachien looked at the dentist in amusement. This guy was actually frightened by his own imagination. Unfortunately, he was not loved by God. It was more accurate to say that he was the god of misfortune. As for these fellows, they could be considered as fish in the moat. However, he was exceptionally happy to see the miserable state of these people. His only hope was that nothing would happen to this boat. He had just returned and would have to stay for at least a day and a half before he could go back. If anything happened to this boat, he would be in trouble along with it. The problem now was how to untie this rope. Damn it, these people were quite professional in tying him up. His hands were tied behind his back, and his thumbs were locked together. He couldn't exert any strength at all. His arms and legs were also tightly tied up with nylon ropes that were as thick as a thumb. Golden spear, cut the rope behind me, Renbachien said in his mind. Although these two scammers had angered him to death, he could only rely on them now. Then, he felt his two thumbs loosen. Renbachien heaved a sigh of relief and thought to himself, fortunately, I'm not fooled this time. Also, the rope on my arms and legs. Renbachien almost didn't feel any sharp blade cutting the rope, and the rope was directly loosened. The change in the rope was immediately noticed by Capoeira, who took out his gun and aimed at Renbachien. Renbachien put his palm on the ground, bounced up, and stepped on Capoeira's head. Pfft! The entire boat sank, and the South American man's neck was stepped into his chest. He died instantly. This change was so sudden that the other two people couldn't react at all. They saw Capoeira suddenly become shorter, and there was an extra person on top of his head. The brown-haired man was about to pick up the gun beside him when Renbachien appeared beside him as if he had teleported and stepped on his palm. Ah! The brown-haired man let out a miserable howl. His entire palm was crushed by this stomp. Renbachien opened his fingers and lifted him up by his head. With a friendly smile, he said, "As long as I use a little more force, your head will crack like an egg." Bang! So, you better be quiet, just like him. Isn't that good? Ever since Renbachien had launched an attack, Dentist had reached out for his gun but quickly retracted his hand. The other party was too fast. It was hard to believe that humans could be so fast. He didn't even see the other party's shadow before he suddenly appeared on top of Capoeira's head. He even suspected that the other party knew some kind of magic. Dentist was very sure that he couldn't draw his gun as fast as the other party. Furthermore, the other party was someone who was loved by God. Gatling's fate was already clear. He had already boarded the boat, but he died in such a ridiculous manner. This made him feel fear from the bottom of his heart. Renbocchen saw the fear in the brown-haired man's eyes, gently placed him back in his seat, and even stroked his head as if he was comforting a pet. Now that we are going to the rendezvous point, where are you taking me? Renbocchen suddenly changed his mind because he remembered something. This incident had exposed a major weakness of him and the winged cavalry. It was this kind of concealed weapon that made it easy for him to fall into their trap when he was careless. If he went back now and said that he had these people under control after waking up. However, this would also confirm this weakness that could be easily targeted and looked down upon. It would be better to put on a show and make people think that he was deliberately captured in order to catch the people behind the scenes and give them a deep revenge. This would also be in line with the image that he had been trying to create. The brown-haired man immediately fell into a dilemma. If he refused, he would definitely die and fail the mission. If he agreed, he would become a traitor to the country. However, there were so many people there, and they might be able to capture him again. If that was the case, he would be able to atone for his crimes. In China's words, this was called beating someone at their own game. I got it, the brown-haired man said as he folded his right hand. There's a submarine waiting in front, and it will send you to the base. Well, I like obedient children. Renbocchen smiled, threw all the weapons on the boat into the sea, and then sat in his seat to enjoy the sea breeze. Base? That base in Japan, right? On the other side, the Messier 87 was in chaos. Renbocchen had been captured. Even Yongsan couldn't believe it. They were obviously so powerful, but they were actually knocked out by a few tranquilizer bombs. This was simply shocking. We must rescue him. At any cost. Yongsan gritted his teeth. No matter what, he couldn't let Renbocchen fall into the enemy's hands. He first called the higher-ups, and the instructions he received were the same as his own. Then, he quickly arranged his men. The most important thing was where Renbocchen would be sent to. Contact Shenfeng and inform the cavemen in the villa. Although these people are like a group of primitive lunatics, they can still use force at times like this. The people from the Blessed Enclave were referred to as cavemen for short. In private, many people directly called them cavemen. After a while, the villa was in an uproar. The lady boss had actually been captured. If Her Majesty knew about this, there would definitely be a big problem. They didn't forget that Her Majesty had brought the lady boss all the way to Great Xia. They had to snatch the lady boss back. Who did it? Kill them. Kill them. Where's my knife? Take out all your knives. Chapter 7:16. Where is the lady boss? A group of people donned their leather armor and wielded their sabers. Their murderous intent soared to the sky. If something happened to the lady boss, even if the Empress didn't skin them alive, they wouldn't have the face to stay any longer. Let's wait. That girl just called to say that she is investigating the whereabouts of the lady boss and will let us know once she finds out. Su Wei sat on the sofa, propped his saber on the ground, and stroked the scabbard with one hand. Speaking of which, I haven't seen blood in a long time. My saber has been thirsty for blood for a long time. We are the best at killing generals, capturing flags, and killing entire families. Those people are too weak to save the lady boss, Xionging said. He had followed them to the Southern Dynasty to look for the two missing people and had underestimated the combat power of the Messier 87 department. Logically speaking, the Lady Boss's strength should be sufficient now. Although they haven't fought before, there shouldn't be anyone in this country who can beat him, right? I watched those combat competitions on TV, and all of them were as soft as the women of Great Xia. How could the Lady Boss be captured? Even if they had guns, they wouldn't be able to do anything to her. Shi Tong and Jiang Yuanshan accompanied the Lady Boss out. Where are they? They seem to be fine. They are now at the Messier 87 department. We will only know the details after seeing them, Su Wei said. The group of people chatted for a while and then stopped talking, waiting for news. They closed their eyes and rested, preparing for the upcoming battle. The winged cavalry had seen many life and death battles and were used to conserving their energy before a battle. Shenfeng didn't notice anything wrong when she walked out of the door. As she pushed open the door and walked in, 10 men who were sitting lazily with their eyes closed suddenly opened their eyes. The room seemed to be illuminated, and everyone's eyes revealed a cold glint. They gave her the feeling of 10 ferocious beasts ready to hunt, and they were even more terrifying than ferocious beasts. They had completely lost their original carefree look. Shenfeng subconsciously arched her body and leaped backward. She then realized that this was a conditioned reflex, and these people wouldn't attack her. Where is the Lady Boss? Su Wei asked Shenfeng, who had retreated and returned. A department called the Messier 87 informed me, but I'm not sure about the details. But before I came here, I called them again. They are still looking for the whereabouts of the Lady Boss. If there is any news, they will inform me immediately, so I also came here to wait. Hearing this, everyone closed their eyes again. What are you guys wearing leather armor for? Performing in an opera. Wearing this on the street, it's almost as if you're going to cause trouble, Shenfeng said as she looked at them. Everyone pondered for a while and realized that they weren't in Dayo or going to war. Although he had only killed people in his life and had never saved anyone, his cerebellum thought that it was not suitable to wear these things on the streets. Everyone obediently went back and changed into their sportswear. However, they still held their long sabers in their hands. Everyone silently stroked the scabbard or rested. Shenfeng could no longer stay in this atmosphere for 5 minutes. It was too depressing. It wasn't the kind of oppressive feeling when no one spoke. Instead, it was as if the air had been sealed, making it difficult for people to even breathe. It was like being surrounded by a pack of wolves. After waiting for 3 hours, they finally got the news they wanted. The satellite found the speedboat. They also saw Renbachian being brought onto a submarine. To be able to send such an agent and have a submarine in this location, even if they couldn't detect the submarine's movements, they could still guess where they were going. This was because that was the only place where submarines could dock. It was also the country's largest naval base in the Western Pacific Ocean. After getting the exact news, Yongsan hesitated for a moment because there were tens of thousands of Navy soldiers there. However, Renbachian's matter was too important to fail. He wouldn't hesitate even if he had to make a scene. For this reason, he also pulled over a dozen experts trained by the military from that base. They were all man-wool experts. Although they weren't as terrifying as the cavemen, they were more suitable for infiltration and combat with firearms. At this time, Renbachian was on his first submarine trip in his life. Although he was locked in the cabin with the brown-haired man and the dentist, he was still in the dark. Renbachian was prepared to make a scene at the other party's base before slipping back to Dayo. With his current strength, as long as he wasn't surrounded by people in an open space, he would still be safe. At most, he would find a place to hide for a day or two and then directly return to Dayo. In any case, he would cause trouble for the other party. In this way, the matter of him being knocked over by a tranquilizer gun could be said to be intentional. In any case, he would be able to regain some face. Wasn't it because of the Empress's strength that the nation had always treated him and the Empress with respect? In the end, he was knocked over by a tranquilizer gun. He was afraid that he would be looked down upon. Renbachien had always believed in one thing, and that was to keep his fangs outside. This would save him a lot of trouble. If he was looked down upon, there would be a lot of trouble in the future. In the face of the nation's size, it was very likely that he would really become a pig. Both Renbachien and the brown-haired man had their own plans. If they couldn't even take down one target with so many people in the base, it would simply be a joke. Both parties had their own plans, but they had forgotten that things didn't always go their way. Especially when Renbachien was currently favored by a certain *T-stirrer. After traveling for less than 2 hours, the submarine began to stop. The dentist went out of the cabin to inquire and found out that the propeller was actually entangled in a fishing net. They had to surface to clear the fishing net from the propeller. Upon hearing this news, the dentist went into the cabin and looked at Renbachien with a complicated gaze. He then lowered his head and remained silent. Sure enough, it was another accident. What would be the next accident? When would it happen? The dentist silently drew a cross on his forehead and chest. The second accident came very quickly. When the submarine urgently floated to the surface, everyone suddenly felt the submarine violently shake as if it had collided with something. Renbachien's heart suddenly skipped a beat. If there was a problem with the submarine, he could only kill everyone in the submarine and fight for enough oxygen to last for a day and a half. However, he didn't know that the electrolytic oxygen production equipment and the oxygen in the liquid oxygen tank were enough for everyone on the submarine to survive for 3 months. If that really happened, it could only be said that these people were unlucky. Fortunately, that didn't happen, and the submarine safely returned to the surface. The dentist went out to inquire and brought back a few pieces of information. First, the submarine's sonar system had also malfunctioned. After that, when it surfaced, it didn't discover a fishing boat from Japan. Originally, it was thought that the thing entangled in the propeller was an abandoned fishing net floating in the sea. This kind of situation would occasionally happen. Now, it seemed like this wasn't the case at all. Second, the fishing boat had capsized, and dozens of people had fallen into the sea. Currently, the soldiers on the submarine were inspecting the submarine and participating in the rescue. Third, this submarine probably couldn't dive anymore. They were contacting other ships to pick up these people. The dentist kept looking at Renbachien as he reported these few pieces of information. Sure enough, there was another accident. If he could, he really wanted to give up this mission and escape immediately. The further he got from that person, the better. Even the brown-haired man had an incredulous look in his eyes. There were actually consecutive accidents. There was an accident with the car, an accident with the speedboat, and now there was an accident with the submarine. Was this person really loved by God? Chapter 7:17. Sitting in the submarine, Renbachien felt helpless. Why was it so difficult for him to do something? It wasn't easy for him to make up his mind to wreak havoc at the enemy's base, but something happened to the submarine. He should really dissect the beachy to see what it was made of. If he could figure it out, he would probably be able to develop a weapon based on the law of causality. This level of misfortune was comparable to that of the god of misfortune. He felt that it was stronger than the last time he saw it. Although there were earthquakes, collapsing houses, being attacked by eagles, and being assassinated, it wasn't as frequent as this time. Driving a car into a pit, a speedboat collided with a shark, and now, a submarine collided with a fishing boat. This journey could no longer be described as full of disasters. Renbachien felt that if he were to obediently stay at their base for a month, wouldn't their base become a wasteland? Renbochin's current mood was as if he had prepared for a long time and was full of anticipation while taking advantage of a few days of vacation to travel, only to have a problem with his transportation. He was full of resentment. After waiting in the cabin for 2 hours, the sky began to darken, and the waves began to get bigger. Wave after wave hit the submarine, causing it to shake violently. Following that, bean-sized raindrops came crashing down. Renbochin listened to the sound of the raindrops hitting the steel and thought that it was fortunate that this was a submarine. If it were any other boat, he would really be worried that it would be capsized by the waves. There was no worst-case scenario in today's situation, only worse. The brown-haired man and dentist were also deeply worried. At this time, there were noises coming from outside. After the captain contacted the base, he finally allowed the fishermen to enter the submarine, but they were limited to a small area. The fishing boat had already sunk to the bottom of the sea. Following that, the submarine began to dive to avoid the storm and big waves on the sea. The storm on the sea came and went quickly. 2 hours later, the sky cleared up after the rain, and a 30-meter-long transport helicopter appeared in the sky. When Renbochin and the other 2 people moved into the helicopter, there was already a team of armed soldiers inside. 9 people made up a combat team. Although there were 9 people in the cabin, more than half of the space was empty. Seeing the soldiers in the cabin, the brown-haired man hesitated. After weighing the risk of fighting with Renbochin in the plane, he gave up the idea. After greeting the other party and exchanging a few words, the 2 of them sandwiched Renbochin in the middle of the cabin and sat him down like real criminals. "Hey, you didn't say anything strange because I can't understand it, right?" Renbochin smiled from ear to ear. "There's no need," the brown-haired man said. "I don't plan on dying with you here. I'm not ready to die for my country." "Very good." Renbochin smiled. The soldiers around them looked at them in confusion, not knowing what they were talking about. However, their mission was to send these 3 people to the base, and they couldn't be bothered with anything else. After a while, Renbochin started to feel strange because the helicopter wasn't flying east, but south. If they flew east, they would reach the largest naval base in East Asia. His original destination was also there. Flying south could only mean Zhuoshibou's base. It was the largest base for helicopters and amphibious ships. Not far from it was the Zhongxing base, which had the most land forces stationed there. Along the way, Renbochin experienced a close air refueling and took another 2 hours to land slowly. Unfortunately, he could only see the sea from where he was and couldn't see the full view of the base. Renbochin clenched his fists and felt a little nervous. After all, it was unthinkable for an average person to create havoc in a military base with tens of thousands of soldiers. In the eyes of people like Renbochin, who grew up on Earth, the strong military power of the military base was deeply rooted. Renbochin felt that he was too arrogant to have such a crazy plan. However, he also wanted to see how far he could go. In any case, he could just raise his hands and surrender if he couldn't win. After the helicopter vibrated for a while, it steadily landed on the ground. The soldiers stood up and said to the 3 of them, "You can go down now." The brown-haired man and the dentist once again sandwiched Renbochin as he got off the helicopter. Before Renbochin even got off, he saw a team of soldiers with loaded guns waiting below. Including the team behind, there were 4 combat teams with more than 30 people. For an ordinary person, even if this number was divided by 10, it would be enough. Most importantly, this was an empty field surrounded by lawns and barbed wire. Not far away was the dock, where a warship and some amphibious ships were parked. Soldiers could be seen everywhere, and there were soldiers standing guard everywhere. There were also forklifts coming and going, and a large number of wooden boxes piled up on the side. In fact, during this period of time, a fleet was conducting an exercise here, and this base was providing logistics for this exercise. The timing of this operation and this exercise couldn't be said to be unrelated. It was just that Rinpoche's whereabouts were erratic. If he had been a few days late, the fleet would have returned, and the deterrent force of this fleet would have been reduced. However, Rinpoche just happened to appear at this time, which made the other party overjoyed. "I'm Major Wallace. Your plane can't depart for another 6 hours. Before that, follow me." A white man came over and saluted. Seeing this, the brown-haired man didn't hesitate anymore. He suddenly broke into a run and shouted, "Be careful, catch him." Many of the soldiers were stunned. Wasn't he already here? However, they only froze for a moment before they reacted and took out their weapons one after another. Rinpoche had arrived at his destination. Ignoring the brown-haired man, he leaped up and pounced on Major Wallace in front of him. He was like a ferocious tiger coming down the mountain. The Major immediately felt as if a huge tiger was pouncing on him with a fishy wind. When a tiger hunted, it could pounce 7 to 8 meters away. If it ran or pounced from above, the distance could be even further. Coupled with the tiger's weight and strength of more than 1,000 kilograms, humans had almost no ability to resist. Although Rinpoche's physique couldn't compare to that of a tiger, his pounce was more swift and fierce. He covered a distance of more than 10 meters in an instant. This was a move of the military fist of death, which was specially used to pounce into the enemy's formation. With one strike, the target would be split in half, and the next move would be a sweep with the saber. With a single sweep, he could clear out an empty space. Only the Aboriginals would use such a bold and ferocious move. Although Rinpoche didn't have a saber in his hand, that pounce carried the force of 1,000 kilograms. Like a smashed watermelon, red and white matter flew in all directions. Rinpoche then grabbed the corpse that hadn't fallen and swept it horizontally, sending 5 or 6 soldiers who were taking out their weapons flying. He then threw the corpse at the soldiers behind him and rushed into the crowd in front of him without looking back. One had to know that these soldiers were from the Special Forces and were ranked highly in the world. However, in the face of Rinpoche's sudden burst of strength, they had almost no power to resist. In the blink of an eye, 5 or 6 of them were sent flying by his kicks or collisions. Their internal organs and blood sprayed out in the air, and it was obvious that they wouldn't survive after falling to the ground. The brown-haired man and the group of soldiers who escorted him were dumbfounded. 5 seconds. In just 5 seconds, Rinpoche had already pounced on the crowd and started a massacre. More than 10 people had lost their fighting strength. Half of the soldiers behind him were sent flying by the corpse. The rest had just unlocked the safety and placed their guns on their shoulders to take aim. However, they couldn't capture Rinpoche's movements at all. Especially now that he was massacring the group of soldiers, with his speed, it would be difficult for those people to even think of escaping. This scene sent a chill down everyone's spine. Were they really facing a human? Chapter 7:18. Rinpoche charged into the crowd and started a massacre. In the blink of an eye, half of the people around him had been cleared. Rinpoche didn't delay any further. After all, this place was too spacious. If they reacted, it would be difficult for him to dodge with so many soldiers and guns. In the past, he used to use anti-aircraft machine guns to deal with the experts from Great Xia. Now, it was the other way around. Their positions had swapped, and the other party was pointing their guns at him. After clearing half of the people, Rinpoche dashed toward a building in the distance at high speed. Immediately, gunshots rang out behind him. Rinpoche felt a chill on his back even before the gunshots rang out. He knew that he was being aimed at. He kept changing his position, using the wooden planks and boxes to block the enemy's shooting trajectory, or simply moving in a snake-like manner. Rinpoche's movements were too fast. In the blink of an eye, he had already dashed 200 to 300 meters away. Those soldiers only fired a few shots before losing sight of him. There were many people in the direction that Rinpoche was running toward. If they were to fire again, the probability of hitting their own people would be much higher than hitting Rinpoche. Following the gunshots, the soldiers who were going to and fro in the base were stunned. They had no idea what was going on. Even if they were beaten to death, they wouldn't believe that someone would kill someone in the military base. Furthermore, it was only one person. They could only hear the gunshots, but they didn't know what exactly happened. Many of them stopped what they were doing and stood there waiting for news. Some of the people who were closer looked in the direction of the gunshots. Only a few of them saw what happened in just a few seconds and were dumbstruck. They truly understood what it meant to rise and fall like a falcon. After Rinpoche ran for 400 meters, he relaxed. The rifle's range was about this distance. From here to the interior of the base was about 2 kilometers. With his speed, it would take him less than 2 minutes to cover the distance. They definitely wouldn't be able to react in time. Once he entered the interior of the base, he wouldn't have anything to worry about in such a complicated situation. The first time he killed someone was during the great hunt against the consecrated expert from the Lien family. He had just advanced to the earth will level, but he was able to block his bullets with a saber. When facing Great Xia, the Great Xia generals could even block the bullets from his anti-aircraft guns with their sabers. After blocking for more than 10 seconds, the opponent's saber couldn't withstand the heavy load and broke into pieces. Only then was he beaten into a pile of minced meat. Some of the Great Xia practitioners used a pair of sabers to block the bullets from the anti-aircraft guns and were shot into the sky by Rinpoche. From this, one could see the strength of an earth will expert. Whether it was his speed, reaction, or dynamic vision, he was no different from Superman. Although he had just attained the earth will level, his speed was not only faster than that of the Aboriginals, but it was also faster than most of the beginner earth will experts. This was his strongest suit. In the face of these armed soldiers, speed was far more important than strength. Moreover, his strength was enough to kill a person with one punch. It was also because of this that he made this crazy decision. As long as he wasn't surrounded by people shooting at him, there shouldn't be many who could threaten him. Along the way, many people looked in the direction of the gunshot, but they were dumbfounded to see a figure pass by them at an unimaginable speed. It was as if the distance was shortened in front of him. 100 meters, 2 seconds. 3,000 meters in 1 minute. A speed of 180 kilometers per hour. Before anyone could react, that figure had already appeared beside them from afar, and then disappeared without a trace. Rinpoche took less than a minute to arrive in front of a building and went in. Who? After entering the building, Rinpoche finally stopped and gasped for breath. This speed was also a great burden for him. At this moment, the 2 guards in front of the main door reacted. They looked at each other in disbelief, shouted for their surroundings, and rushed in with their guns. This was a building that had been around for many years. After entering, there was only a small hall and 2 corridors that extended to both sides. Directly opposite the main door was a staircase. At this moment, there was a white man holding a towel in the hall and looking at Rinpoche in a daze. Just now, he seemed to have felt the wind, and then this person appeared in front of him. He was an Asian man. He wasn't considered tall, but he was very strong. It was very rare for an Asian to appear here. Although this base was shared with the Japan Self-Defense Forces, Japan occupied less than 20% of the area and wasn't in this area. Why would an Asian man come here? Who are you? Why are you here? This isn't a place you should be. The other party spoke in English, and Rinpoche could only understand the first sentence. Who are you? However, the other party didn't seem to have a good attitude. I am your grandpa. Rinpoche panted heavily, wiped the perspiration off his forehead, took a step forward, and landed a punch on the man's chest. The man felt as if he had been hit by a car, and even his internal organs spilled out. The two guards in front of the door saw this scene as soon as they rushed in. Without saying anything, they raised their guns and aimed at Renbochin. As a result, they realized that the person in front of them was gone. Not good. This thought emerged in the minds of the two guards, but it was too late. Renbochin directly grabbed the back of their heads and pressed them to the ground. Leaving the three corpses behind, Renbochin first went up to the second floor. Then, he leaned against the staircase railing and rested for half a minute. At the same time, he looked around. The corridors on both sides were filled with rooms, and there was almost no one in sight. Renbochin pushed open a room. Inside was a bed with a few pairs of shoes and a television hanging on the wall. It looked like a dormitory. The few rooms he pushed open were the same. Renbochin heard the noise coming from downstairs. The two guards shouted when they came in just now, and it seemed that other people had arrived. Renbochin directly pushed open the window and jumped down. Behind him was a row of small buildings. He went straight into one of the rooms and saw a middle-aged white man sitting at a table looking at something. When he heard Renbochin's voice, he raised his head and was obviously stunned for a moment. He wanted to speak, but Renbochin didn't wait for him to speak and said, "I'm your uncle." With a leap, he stepped on the top of that person's head and gently landed on the ground. Looking at the military rank on the corpse's clothes, he was actually a lieutenant. Going up the stairs to the second floor, there was a row of cabinets that contained all kinds of medicine. Next to a table and chair, there were two first aid kits. Further inside were two beds. It seemed that the person just now was a military doctor. Renbochin first opened the window and listened to the sounds outside. Then, he sat on the bed to rest and think about his next move. Since he was prepared to make a big fuss, he definitely wasn't here to kill a few people. Just now, he saw a lot of parking aprons and runways. Behind the runways was a hangar, which was a good target. There were also those warships at the port. It would be even better if there were some ammunition depots. Before that, he had two things to do. One of them was to replenish his food supply. After all, the cultivation system in that world wasn't like the legendary cultivation system of immortality. Instead, everything was based on the amount of food one could eat. A battle consumed a lot of energy, and this energy was replenished by a lot of food. One couldn't fight on an empty stomach. Renbochin was already feeling hungry now. Another thing was that he was still lacking a weapon. Golden spear, metal chain. Renbochin called out in his mind. The metal chain emerged from the top of Renbochin's head, bent downward, and reached in front of his eyes. As for the golden spear, it didn't react at all. The two of you have been living here for so long, and it's time for you to pay your rent. From now on, the two of you must be used by me. Otherwise, don't think that I can't deal with the two of you now. Once I reach the spirit will level, I will send the two of you back to the furnace to be reforged and erase your consciousness. Then, the two of you will cease to exist, Renbochin said gloomily. At that time on the speedboat, he was really angry. These two fellows had been living in his sea of knowledge for so long, but they weren't of any use at all. What was the point of keeping them? Following Renbochin's gloomy words, the metal chain immediately trembled. As long as it had consciousness, it was most afraid of having its consciousness erased, which meant death. Chapter 719. Heaven-grade weapons were condensed from the soul. Although they could be condensed into a physical body in the outside world, their essence was still the soul. They were connected to the owner like limbs. If the owner died, the soul would disappear, and the heaven-grade weapon would naturally disappear. It was just like how a person's physical body would disappear if they lost their life. However, the metal chain and the golden spear were somewhat different. These two heaven-grade weapons were brought back to Earth from another world when their owners were still alive. Renbochin cut off their connection with their owners. However, their owners didn't die, and the heaven-grade weapons didn't disappear either. This resulted in the two heaven-grade weapons not disappearing. Heaven-grade weapons were condensed from the soul, and in some ways, they could be seen as part of a person's soul. After cutting off their connection with their owners, the originally dead heaven-grade weapons gave birth to an ignorant consciousness. In order to avoid losing the support of the owner's soul and collapsing, they instinctively chose Renbochin, lodged in his consciousness, and relied on his soul to survive. Although these two heaven-grade weapons had their own consciousness, it was more of an instinct, just like a child learning how to speak. Their greatest consciousness was to continue existing. Therefore, the two of them had been staying in Renbochin's sea of knowledge. As long as his life wasn't in danger, they wouldn't come out. This was because they had been in his body for such a long time and had been contaminated with his spirit. If he died, the two of them would most likely dissipate. Other than this matter that concerned the survival of these two heaven-grade weapons, they didn't care about anything else. This was because if something happened to them outside, Renbochin's soul wouldn't be able to support repairing them. Therefore, they were very timid. Now that Renbochin threatened them, the two heaven-grade weapons could naturally feel his determination. When a very timid person was threatened, there were usually only two situations that would occur. One was to explode, and the other was to continue being timid. The two heaven-grade weapons immediately chose the second option and continued to be timid. A spear grew out of Renbochin's right hand. It was 7 feet 2 inches long and was close to 2.4 meters. It weighed about 50 kilograms, was silver in color, and was covered with golden veins. As Renbochin turned the spear in his hand, the body of the spear shone with a golden light. This was the heaven-grade weapon of Tingyu, the fourth most powerful spear in the world. When Renbochin held the spear handle in his hand, it actually felt slightly elastic and not as cold as iron. He reached out and poked at the wall. Almost without feeling any resistance, he pierced a hole in the wall. He pulled it back, and the sunlight shone in through the hole. "Good spear," Renbochin exclaimed. In reality, how would he know what a good gun was? The spear of the fourth strongest expert in the world must be good. Moreover, the sharpness of the blade could be considered good. After saying this, Renbochin's eyebrows twitched, his gaze focused, and he thrust his spear again. This shot wasn't as sloppy as the previous one. It was as fast as lightning. Even those who didn't know anything would be able to tell that these two shots were very different. If one were to say that the first shot was just a layman's act, then this shot was made with strength in his legs and a twist of his body, which was extremely pleasing to the eye. Renbochin pulled his spear back after thrusting it out. He held the spear with both hands and actually shook it again. The entire room was filled with specks of cold light, and the sound of the spear piercing through the air whistled through the room. Renbochin consecutively used the spear techniques of thrusting, shaking, flower dancing, piercing, and poking. Only then did he stop and stand still with ecstasy in his eyes. This spear actually came with skills. Just now, when he held the spear in his hands, some things appeared in his mind. The basics of spear techniques were thrusting, grasping, and blocking. After these things entered his mind, he immediately understood many things. In addition to the basics of thrusting, grasping, and blocking, there were also the evolved thrusting, whipping, twisting, circling, pouncing, poking, flower dancing, and so on. The spear in his hand seemed to have immediately become a part of his body. With just a thought, he naturally knew how to exert force. It was as if he had been imbued with wisdom. Even though he wasn't considered proficient and needed to control his body to do it, it was far better than holding the spear and randomly thrusting it. If he didn't guess wrongly, these things were left behind by the spirit spear Tingyu. They were his insights into spear techniques. Surprise! It was simply a surprise. Renbochin had never thought that there would be such a good thing. There was actually a novice gift bag. At this time, this novice gift bag was simply too timely. It could be said that Renbochin's original combat strength was 10, and his random thrusting with a stick was 11. Now, it had jumped to 15. This was the insight of the fourth most powerful expert in the world. He had picked up a big bargain. After walking around the room a few times and making a few movements with the spear in his hands, Renbochin finally suppressed his excitement. Then, he looked at the metal chain that was swimming around his arm like a snake. He grabbed one end of the metal chain, but it immediately wrapped tightly around his arm and wouldn't let go no matter what. "Did you hide anything good?" Renbochin laughed. The metal chain desperately tried to break free from Renbochin's grasp, followed his arm, and wrapped around his waist. "What time is it? If you have something good, quickly take it out." However, the metal chain still didn't respond. Could it be that the metal chain doesn't have these things? Renbochin pondered for a while. After all, there were only the golden spear and the metal chain, and there were no other references. He also didn't know why the golden spear left these things behind, but the metal chain didn't. Renbochin felt that there were two possibilities. First, Ting Yu was too powerful. After all, he was the fourth most powerful expert in the world. Whether it was the strength of his spirit or his willpower, he was far superior to ordinary spirit will experts. Therefore, when he practiced the spear every day, some of his insights were left in the golden spear, forming an inextinguishable mark. Therefore, when the golden spear was in his hand, those insights were transmitted to his mind. After all, the essence of the golden spear was still the spirit, a part of Ting Yu's spirit. Second, the usage of the metal chain was different from that of the golden spear. The golden spear was Ting Yu's weapon. Whether it was practicing or fighting, the golden spear almost never left his hand and completely carried Ting Yu's will. The metal chain was different because it was actually a rope that could move. For example, the golden spear was a weapon, while the metal chain was a magic treasure that could be thrown out to bind people. Therefore, there wasn't anything that could be carried on the golden spear. Renbochin felt that both of these possibilities were possible, and both of them made sense. Unfortunately, there were only these two heaven-grade weapons and no previous cases to look for, so he didn't know if his guess was correct. However, no matter what, he had profited a lot. At this moment, an alarm sounded in the base, directly interrupting Renbochin's thoughts. It seems that the entire base is going to be mobilized. It's time for me to change locations. Renbochin leaned against the window and looked outside. Chapter 720. Base, in a room. So many people just for one person. The old man who rushed over was surprised when he heard the other party's words. He thought that something big had happened. He hurriedly climbed out of the little vixen's bed, and it turned out to be for one person. Sounded the alarm because of one person. If the news got out, the entire base would become a joke. This is a big deal. Don't underestimate this person. Surrounded by 4 special forces, he only used a few seconds to kill 7 people and injure 6. This is not something a human can do. Take a look at the photos of the scene. Another person turned on the computer, and there were a few photos of the scene that were uploaded to the computer. One of the people in the worst condition, even his head was missing. This was done with his bare hands. Before that, the other party was more than 10 meters away from him. Then, the other party rushed into the team behind him and killed another 6 people before anyone could fight back. All of them had multiple broken bones and ruptured internal organs. They died on the spot. It was like being hit by a truck. This was done by one person. The old man was a little surprised when he saw the picture on the computer. He could tell at a glance that it was a helipad. It was an open space without any shelter. In such a situation, he killed 7 people and seriously injured 6. He's very strong, much stronger than a heavyweight boxer. More importantly, he was fast. After doing so many things in a few seconds, he actually ran away at an incredible speed. According to the last footage of him, this speed was 100 meters in 2 seconds. Are you sure you're not joking with me? The old man was shocked. I also hope it's a joke. Look at this, it's a clip from the surveillance camera. The man opened another video file. At the 5-second mark, the old man focused on the image on the video. He saw 2 soldiers standing there looking in a certain direction. Then, when the time was up to 5 seconds, suddenly a figure rushed into the image and disappeared before he could react. Then, the man played the video in slow motion again and again. Only then did he gradually see the situation of the person running in the image. Because of the camera, the figure was very blurry and couldn't be seen clearly. But his eyebrows were already furrowed. He had already understood the problem. Who is this person? What the higher-ups want should be related to the biochemical experiments in China. I'm guessing he's a successful product. His strength, explosiveness, and speed were far beyond that of a normal person. If this was the progress of the Chinese biochemical experiments, then the situation was indeed very serious. This person was previously in charge of the CIA, and he needs to transfer here to return to his country. Now, it's our job. I just spoke to Washington on the phone. He must be caught alive. As he spoke, the light on the communicator on the table lit up. After he pressed it, a voice came from the communicator. Sir, there's a new discovery. Lieutenant Kent in the back of dormitory block C was killed, and there are some problems with the wall on the 2nd floor. The enemy might have a weapon we don't know about. I've already asked someone to send you the pictures. At this moment, Rinpoche was eating raw beef in the kitchen. He didn't have much time. He had been seen outside just now. Although he had killed the other party, the corpse would soon be discovered. He forcefully stuffed 1 kilogram of raw beef into his stomach to make his stomach feel better. Rinpoche found something to wrap another 20 kilograms of raw beef before jumping out of the window. 3 soldiers were searching with their guns when they suddenly saw someone jump out of the rear window of the restaurant about 30 meters away. The 3 of them immediately stopped and raised their guns. At the same time, they said, SEAL Team 6, Group 3, found the target. The coordinates are, As soon as Rinpoche landed on the ground, he pounced on the 3 like a cheetah. Faced with Rinpoche's speed, the other party didn't even have time to speak and immediately opened fire. Ding, ding, ding. A gold and silver rod suddenly appeared in Rinpoche's hand and shielded his body. A series of bullets hit the golden spear. Godly spear. Rinpoche suddenly twisted his body to dodge a few bullets and threw the spear in his hand. Like a gold and silver lightning bolt, it directly pierced through one of the soldiers. The other 2 were sweating profusely and couldn't care less about their companion's life. Rinpoche's speed was too fast. He continuously changed his figure on the ground and closed in on them like a phantom. Damn it, he's not human at all. One of them looked at Rinpoche, who was getting closer and closer with a face full of fear. Using a rod to block bullets. He can even dodge bullets. Damn it. Where did that rod come from? At this moment, a metal chain grew out of Rinpoche's hand. In an instant, it grew by 10 meters and wrapped around the neck of one of the soldiers. Gotcha! That person's neck was immediately broken. Rinpoche leaped and landed behind the other party. After the metal chain broke the first person's neck, it followed Rinpoche's movements and wrapped around the last person's neck. After killing all 3 of them, Rinpoche walked to the bodies of the 3 and rummaged through them. He originally wanted to see if there were any grenades or flash grenades, but the other party only had guns, ammunition, and a military knife. If it was in the past, he would naturally take the other party's gun for granted. However, in the current situation, it was more of a burden to hold on to it. As long as he used it, his position would be exposed, so it was more convenient to use the golden spear and metal chain. Renbochin turned around to pick up the golden spear. When it fell into his hand, the golden spear trembled incessantly. It seemed to be very angry at Renbochin for throwing it out just now. However, Renbochin didn't care. Just as he walked to the corner of a building, he suddenly stopped. He heard footsteps and 6 people were jogging over from the other end of the corner. They were about 11 to 12 meters away. 1, 2, 3, Renbochin counted in his heart. When the other party was about to reach the corner, he suddenly rushed out and pierced the person in front with the golden spear in his hand. Renbochin pulled out the golden spear and shook it to produce 3 cold stars. The heads of the 3 people closest to him immediately had holes in them. The last 2 people were already staring at Renbochin in fear. Renbochin immediately grabbed a corpse and used it to block in front of him. Da. A silver snake stretched out from Renbochin's hand again and directly broke the neck of a person 6 meters away. Renbochin carried the corpse and rushed to the front of the last person and pulled out his spear. The gunshot stopped. The other party was a young man in his early 20s. He looked Asian and still had a little immaturity on his face. The tip of the spear was pressed against his neck. His head kept breaking out in cold sweat, and his face was full of fear. Renbochin stuck his head out from behind the corpse and looked at the other party. "Where's the headquarters?" Don Tkall. That young man had a look of despair on his face. Renbochin exerted a little force in his hand, and blood spurted out from the other party's throat. Chapter 721. The Zuoshibo Naval Base covered an area of 405 hectares, 4 million square meters, and had a total length of 62 kilometers. 86% of it was used by that Western country, and the original owner of the base only used 14% of it. In the past, although the base was busy, it was orderly. However, it was very different today. Groups of soldiers armed with live ammunition searched the base wantonly, and it was quite chaotic. This puzzled the self-defense forces and made them think of ways to find out what was going on. However, they didn't expect that there was only one person who caused this disturbance. Pfft! Renbochin flicked his wrist, twisted the spear, and pulled it out of the other party's throat. In addition to the sound of blood spurting out, there was also the sound of air leaking. Renbochin inexplicably thought of a saying, "I once heard that if the knife is fast enough, the sound of blood spurting out from the wound is like the sound of the wind." It's very pleasant to hear. When Renbochin saw this saying, he inexplicably felt a little sad, but also a little aesthetic. Now that he really heard such a sound, he didn't feel anything. It was as if he had killed a chicken. He had died so many times. He had drowned, burned, died of thirst, and died so many times. How could he feel? There were 8 people lying around him, and he didn't fire a single shot. This was already the 11th batch, and Renbochin was getting more and more comfortable. Whether it was killing people or shooting, he was getting faster and faster. Relying on his extraordinary 5 senses, Renbochin was always able to ambush the other party at the right place. At close range, these people were now like weeds in his hands. Renbochin pushed open the door with a gun in one hand and looked outside. There were more and more people nearby, and it seemed like the other party was shrinking the encirclement. Previously, when he killed 2 groups of soldiers, he was still relatively leisurely. However, as time passed, there were more and more teams searching around him, and he paid more attention to hiding his whereabouts. What he didn't know was that the other party didn't immediately search for him. Instead, they set up an encirclement. They were afraid that he would run away. After that, they began to search this area wantonly. Now, the entire base was mobilized. In addition to the encirclement, a total of 2,000 soldiers were sent to this area to search for him. Over there. In the opposite building, a man walked into a room, saw Renbachien, who was standing at the opposite window, and immediately reported his location. Renbachien could already hear the sound of people running downstairs. He wasn't in a hurry to leave. Instead, he waited at the corner of the staircase. He is waiting for them to come up. Although the other party had begun to lighten his footsteps, it still couldn't escape his ears. The two combat squads hurried over from upstairs and downstairs respectively. After exchanging hand signals, they prepared their battle stances and slowly advanced. After leaving the room, he arrived at the corridor filled with corpses. He pushed open the window and jumped out. Not down, but up. He jumped 6 or 7 meters high, almost at the same level as the roof. At the same time, he turned around and swung his hand. A silver chain was immediately thrown out and wrapped around the drainage pipe on the roof. Renbachien pulled himself close to the wall, kicked off the wall, and flipped to the roof. This was a new usage that he had just come up with. In the complex environment of the base, the use of the metal chain was not limited to killing people. He could even pretend to be Peter Parker. He's up there. He ran to the rooftop. Renbachien landed on the rooftop and sized up the surroundings. There were many buildings nearby. A few of them were about the same height as where he was, and the distance between them was also less than 20 meters. This was the distance that he could currently reach. 17 meters was the furthest he could jump after a run-up. If the metal chain was wrapped around something to give him strength, he could only use it for 9 meters at most. That was about 26 meters. He looked into the distance and found some problems. There were many rows of soldiers standing around, holding guns and aiming in this direction. They were in an open space that surrounded the building area. Am I surrounded? Renbachien wasn't too nervous after discovering this. Instead, he ran in another direction and jumped over a distance of more than 10 meters in one leap. He didn't even need to use the metal chain. There are people in this direction too. Renbachien moved quickly on the rooftop and soon found that he was indeed surrounded. There seemed to be about 1,000 people in each direction. There were almost 3 people every 10 meters, forming a large net that firmly sealed off this area. From the looks of it, they were going to seal him in these buildings. Unfortunately, you won't be able to do as you wish. Renbachien smiled. The direction in front of him was a 2-lane road, and the soldiers were setting up a perimeter below. On the other side of the road, there was still a 4-story building that was less than 25 meters away. This meant that it was still within his range of movement. Their blockade was useful for ordinary people, and he would be greatly restricted before using the metal chain. However, it wasn't much of a threat to him now. More importantly, there was a row of warehouses not far from that small building. He just didn't know if they were warehouses for supplies or ammunition. Renbachien stood on the rooftop and looked ahead. He suddenly felt a chill down his spine. Someone is aiming at me. Renbachien thought to himself. He then fiercely pointed his gun to the right. Ding! A spark appeared in the air. Then, he heard gunshots in the distance. Is it a sniper? Is the target my right leg? Renbachien looked in that direction and saw a lighthouse. Unfortunately, he couldn't see who was on it. Renbachien stood with his gun, turned his head, and revealed a cold smile in that direction. If the other party was a little closer, he would let them know what a flying shot from outer space was. Unfortunately, they were too far away. Renbachien then took 2 steps forward and leaped forward. When he reached a certain distance, he threw out the metal chain and immediately pulled himself to the opposite rooftop. He just jumped over everyone's heads and disappeared from the sniper's field of vision. On the lighthouse in the distance, a man lay prone behind a sniper rifle and couldn't close his mouth for a long time. What did he just see? The other party actually used that stick in his hand to block the bullet. Furthermore, he did it after he fired the gun. Was the other party faster than a bullet? He's up there. He jumped over. Oh my god, is he Spider-Man? Renbochin had just jumped over when chaos broke out behind him. Renbochin's speed was so fast that he passed by in a flash. Even if the people below kept staring at the top of their heads, they could only see a faint figure. Even if they saw him, they wouldn't be able to stop him. Just like that, he easily broke through the encirclement set up by the other party using thousands of people. On one hand, the environment of this base was very complicated. Other than the port area, there were many multi-story buildings in other places. This made it very convenient for Renbochin to move around without any hindrance, but it hindered the footsteps of others. On the other hand, the other party wasn't used to fighting with extraordinary opponents. Even though they had repeatedly overestimated Renbochin, this overestimation was still within the scope of their understanding of cyborgs. For example, he was stronger and faster. Chapter 722. Damn it. He actually managed to get away. Can he jump more than 20 meters? And has a chain in his hand. Like Spider-Man. Does he have any weaknesses? You don't know. Hundreds of people have died, and you give me this answer. Expand the encirclement and contact Okinawa. We can't care about that now. We have to mobilize the army, or else we won't be able to form a sufficient encirclement. I'll call the headquarters first. A man in the headquarters of Zhua Shibao base flew into a rage. He originally didn't want to mobilize the army. After all, if a few thousand people couldn't catch him, the entire navy would become a joke. However, judging from the current situation, Renbochin was a little tricky. He was like a monkey that couldn't be caught. He was also extremely ruthless. In just a few encounters, he had lost hundreds of people, and all of them died on the spot. Now that Renbochin had moved to a larger area, it would be more difficult to encircle him. Compared to the escape of such an important target, he couldn't care less about his reputation. There were 28,000 people in the Okinawa barracks. Even if a portion of them were transferred over, they would be able to form a sufficiently strong encirclement. After finishing the call, he looked up and said, "Place snipers at all the commanding heights. Also, I want him alive. General, given the current situation, there will be more casualties if we capture him alive. Actually, corpses can also be used for research. The higher-ups won't agree. His existence shows that China has completely surpassed our country in biochemical research. In order to obtain China's research data, we have to send him back to Washington alive no matter how great the sacrifice is. If China completely surpasses our country in this aspect, the sacrifices won't be limited to these people. However, if we don't shoot, given the target's skills, we definitely won't be able to catch him, and he might even escape. Therefore, try to shoot at non-vital points." Understood. The other person immediately understood. Bullets had no eyes. If they hit a vital point, there was nothing they could do. It was better than letting him escape. Renbochin licked his fingertips and swallowed the last piece of beef. In just half a day, he had devoured the 20 kilograms of raw beef. Although it didn't taste good and he didn't like to eat raw food, it didn't feel good to be hungry. Now, he was worried about what he would eat. The consumption of energy during the battle was too high, and the energy contained in the food on Earth was too low. It seemed that he had to find some food after dark. After finishing the last bit of beef, Renbochin stood up and looked around. This was a depression in the roof of the two warehouses, and it was very difficult to see this place from other directions. As for the warehouses below, he took a look at one of them. It was filled with all sorts of marine machinery, and he was not interested in it. There are footsteps below. 1, 2, 3. 16 people. Are they two combat squads moving together? Renbochin slowly walked to the edge and peeked out. More than a dozen people were slowly advancing in a battle formation. There were people watching in almost all directions, and one of them was looking in the direction where Renbochin was. Up there. Renbochin retracted his head and headed in another direction. Since they had discovered their location, the others would soon surround them. There are people here too. There are a total of 8 teams. Renbochin only took a glance in another direction before retreating. However, he was still discovered by the other party. 8 squads were split into 4 groups and searching in this direction. Each group was only 50 meters apart. At the same time, Renbochin felt that he was being targeted again. It was still a sniper, but this time, one was on the lighthouse and the other was on a building in the distance. This is a little troublesome. Renbochin quickly retreated into the depression between the two warehouse roofs and muttered to himself. Looking at the two sides of the warehouse roofs that protruded into arcs, Renbochin suddenly had an idea. The roof of this warehouse was a layer of iron sheet, and the bottom was completely hollow. In other words, the entire warehouse was a layer of iron sheet, which was also known as an iron sheet house in China. Renbochin used the tip of his spear to draw a circle at the side, leaving only a little bit. Then, he flicked the tip of his spear to the side. In front of him was a circular hole that had a diameter of 1 meter. Renbochin took a glance at the bottom and immediately jumped down. The metal chain wrapped around the beam, and Renbochin's body paused for a moment. Then, he released the metal chain from the beam above and gently landed on the ground. Renbochin bypassed the rows of wooden boxes, walked to the back door of the warehouse, and listened carefully to the sounds outside. There were 16 people in this direction just now. Renbochin heard the sound of suppressed breathing coming from the metal plate of the warehouse. 2 people, Renbochin thought to himself. It seemed like these people had split up. Renbochin took a step back and stabbed the spear in his hand twice. The 2 people outside didn't expect the danger to suddenly come from the warehouse wall that they were sticking to. When the tip of the spear emerged from their chests, they looked down. Cannon! Alpha! Cries of alarm immediately came from afar. The 2 of them fell to the ground one after the other. Without hesitation, the people who had split up immediately fired at the warehouse, creating countless bullet holes in the metal sheet. At this time, Renbochin had already changed his position. He came to the side of the warehouse, then made a cut on the metal sheet and moved it aside. There was a door that he could enter and exit through. This was a similar warehouse. There were a total of 38 such warehouses in this row. Renbochin passed through the warehouses until he finally made a cut on the metal sheet. What he saw wasn't a warehouse full of equipment and wooden boxes, but a grassy field. On the other side of the grassy field were hundreds of soldiers. All of them were pointing their guns at him. "You have been surrounded," a man shouted at Renbochin in broken Mandarin. F***ck, Renbochin retreated in a flash, then leaped into the air and hung himself on a beam with a metal chain. Countless bullet holes suddenly appeared on the warehouse wall below him. Rays of sunlight shone into the warehouse through the bullet holes, forming a beam of light. Renbochin squatted on a steel beam, and his expression was no longer as relaxed as before. It seemed like this direction wasn't going to work. If he wanted to break through this grassy field in this direction, he would have to cover at least 50 meters. Furthermore, there were hundreds of soldiers armed with live ammunition. If he were to escape from here, it would be a competition of whether he or the other party's guns were faster. As for behind him, he would definitely be surrounded. In fact, there were already people chasing after him from the warehouse behind him by pressing on the doors that he had opened. With the help of the terrain of the warehouse, as long as he didn't go out, he should be able to hold on for some time. However, he was just like a turtle in a jar. It would be useless even if he could hold on until night time. As long as the other party moved the searchlights over, they would be able to illuminate this area as if it were daytime. As time passed, the other party's encirclement would be more complete, and it would be almost impossible for him to break through at night. It would be great if he had a few smoke grenades. Chapter 723. I didn't find anything here. I don't have any here either. There's a hole in the north wall. It seems like the other party has left from here. Inside the warehouse where Renbochin had killed his men, 2 teams of fully armed soldiers were searching. This is Team 4 of 3rd Platoon. The target isn't at Warehouse 6. It's heading north. Got it. Be careful. A few minutes later. Team 4, please respond if you copy. Team 4, roger that. Please go ahead. The target has appeared. He's appeared in Warehouse 38. Currently, 2nd Platoon and Team 5 and 6 have set up interception points in Warehouse 25, further reducing the enemy's range of action. Your mission is to head to Warehouse 25 with Team 5 immediately. Roger that. Be careful. The opponent is very good at fighting in a small area. Don't give him a chance to get close to you. Understood. Did you hear that? Let's hurry to warehouse number 25. Go. However, as soon as they reached warehouse 9, they heard gunshots coming from the front. Within a minute, the gunshots stopped. At this moment, Renbochin was rummaging through the corpses in a warehouse. He didn't expect the other party to set up so quickly, and he was ambushed as soon as he came out. Although he could block bullets now, even if he had 2 more hands, he wouldn't be able to block a dozen people shooting at the same time, not to mention a repeating rifle. Fortunately, there were all kinds of wooden boxes and equipment in the warehouse, which became the biggest obstacle for the enemy. TSK, these chest muscles. It's a woman. Renbochin rummaged through it and felt a little surprised. Lifting his head to look at the corpse, he saw that it was a golden-haired woman with a pair of hollow eyes. Before she could even react, Zhang Xian's spear had already pierced through her forehead. To him, it didn't matter if the soldiers were male or female. They were all dead anyway. However, he didn't expect it to be a mix of male and female soldiers. 2 of them were female and the rest were male. There was no smoke grenade he wanted. Thinking about it, the smoke grenades had no effect on him. Instead, it would affect their own vision. Naturally, they wouldn't bring this thing. He didn't even have a bulletproof vest. It was the same as smoke grenades. It was inconvenient to move around wearing them, so it was better not to wear them. He did find 2 flash grenades. Renbochin hung the flash grenade on his body, carried his gun, and shuttled back and forth in the warehouse like a phantom. After quickly passing through a few warehouses, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. He seemed to have heard something. He quietly jumped onto a shelf and poked his head out to take a look. Sure enough, he saw a few soldiers slowly advancing in a battle formation, constantly looking around vigilantly. Renbochin landed on the ground, held his spear upside down, and walked forward slowly. He was looking for a suitable ambush position. A moment later, he arrived in front of a shelf. Unlike the other shelves, this shelf was fully filled with items. It could block him, and the other party would come face to face with him when he turned around. It was the perfect place to ambush. After that, Renbochin quietly waited for the few prey that were about to fall into his claws. He even had the leisure to think about what to eat for dinner. Although he could only think about it. At this moment, the encirclement was finally completed. Thousands of soldiers surrounded the 38 warehouses tightly. With a creaking sound, the doors of the warehouses began to open one by one. A large number of soldiers poured into warehouse number 38 and number 15, which this group of soldiers had just passed by. After searching the area, they advanced toward warehouses 16 and 37 through the wall that Renbochin had cut open. Renbochin was in warehouse 17. When he heard the sound of warehouse 16 being opened, Renbochin quickly realized that the other party was well prepared, which was why they were acting so wantonly. Renbochin hesitated for a moment. He heard footsteps coming from not far away, then quietly returned to warehouse 18 and ran in another direction. Not long after, he heard the sound of a search coming from another direction. Renbochin's heart trembled. He changed his direction and looked out through the gap of the warehouse door. Sure enough, there were soldiers aiming their guns at him. Although it was just a gap and he couldn't see the whole picture, he could see quite a number of soldiers. He also saw a squad machine gun, which was quite a threat. Is this a turtle in a jar? Renbochin smacked his lips. It seemed like he had made a mistake in choosing this warehouse. With so many people, if he were to rush out, not to mention the protection of a heaven-grade weapon, even if he had the protection of a deity, he would still be turned into a sieve. How did those great Xia practitioners die? His death definitely wouldn't be as good as theirs. However, the other party's movements were really fast. Could it be that he had to surrender? He didn't know if the other party had prepared a seduction for him. This was interesting, and he might just give in. Would the Empress beat him up? I was forced to do it. Thinking about it this way, surrendering didn't seem too bad. Please don't torture me. I'm really not afraid of pain. Although he was surrounded, Renbochin didn't feel nervous and was still in the mood to think about all sorts of things. However, it seems like I don't have to surrender yet. Renbochin's eyes lit up when he saw a large pile of oil barrels in a corner of the warehouse. Listen up, you have been surrounded. I'll give you 10 minutes to consider whether you want to surrender or meet God. Renbochin recognized the owner of this voice. It was the brown-haired man on the speedboat. However, he didn't have time to care about him now as he was busy looking for something. When he was ready, he first opened a few barrels of diesel and poured it on the other barrels. Then, he kicked over 20 barrels of diesel over. Diesel gushed out of the barrels and flowed all over the ground. He slowly wrapped a piece of cotton cloth around a piece of wood to make a torch. Although diesel was flammable, it wasn't easy to ignite. For example, it was very difficult to ignite with a lighter or a match. However, it was possible to use a torch. Furthermore, he covered the ground with the cotton cloth that he had just found, which became flammable after being stained with diesel. The important thing was that he had at least 1,000 barrels of diesel, which occupied most of the corners of the warehouse and could fit several containers. Unfortunately, there were cotton cloth in the warehouse that could be used to make a torch. He could also use capillaries to let the cotton cloth absorb the diesel and ignite it like a wick. The lighter was from the corpse, and he didn't pay much attention to it before. He even specially went to retrieve it. Renbochin lit the torch in his hand and threw it into the pile of diesel. He watched as the torch slowly ignited the cotton cloth that was stained with diesel oil on the ground. Then, he quickly ran past 3 warehouses, found a seemingly safer corner, dug a hole, and jumped in. The brown-haired man was still using a loudspeaker to persuade them to surrender. Outside the 38 warehouses were thousands of soldiers armed with live ammunition, vigilantly watching their own territory. Hundreds of soldiers were searching the center from 2 directions. Boom! Boom! A series of huge explosions suddenly occurred, and the huge explosions directly blew the warehouses away. Some of the diesel barrels were even like fireballs that were covered in diesel and flames. They were blown hundreds of meters away before exploding. Countless debris, warehouse fragments, and metal barrels turned into powerful weapons during the explosion and swept toward the crowd of soldiers outside. There was also the heat wave of the explosion that directly threw everyone to the ground. It was chaos. The sudden explosion caught everyone off guard. In particular, those burning diesel barrels exploded at close range like cannonballs. The power was no different from cannonballs, and people were thrown off their feet wherever they went. The two warehouses next to each other were turned into a sea of fire. At this moment, the door of another warehouse was suddenly kicked open from the inside. While everyone was still recovering from the explosion, a person rushed into the crowd like a tiger rushing into a flock of sheep. 3 seconds. Without this explosion, these 3 seconds would have turned Renbochin into a sieve. At this moment, Renbochin successfully rushed into the crowd. The pistol in his right hand was like a dragon, shooting out cold stars and piercing the throats of people one by one. The metal chain in his left hand was like a rope that wrapped around the necks of several people. Renbochin swung it hard and immediately smashed them like a weapon. Many elite soldiers were terrified. The person in front of them was like a monster. He was so fast that they couldn't keep up with him. He was also so strong that human bodies were like straws in his hands. Everyone even began to run away. In the face of such a monster, there was only one way to escape. Renbochin flipped and maneuvered in the crowd. He followed the crowd for dozens of meters before suddenly changing direction and crashing into the window of a building more than 10 meters away. Chapter 724. At night, the entire base was brightly lit. All the lights were turned on, and searchlights were patrolling the area. Vehicles with headlights were driving slowly in the base. Soldiers were standing guard in all the dark corners. Even so, they still couldn't catch that man, that yellow man. No one had ever thought that one person could cause such a huge commotion in the base. No one had ever thought that one person could be so powerful and dangerous. The Okinawa military camp nearby had sent reinforcements twice, and now there were a total of 17,000 people searching around the base. However, that man was like a ghost. From time to time, one could hear traces of him and a few gunshots. When the people nearby arrived, they would only see the corpses scattered on the ground. Or, by the time a soldier was found, he was already dead, stabbed to death, or strangled to death by a metal chain. Yes, a metal chain and a cold weapon, a long spear. Nowadays, a team of 50 to 100 people usually operated. However, such a large team operation made the base look like a sieve. From 3:00 in the afternoon until now, only 6 hours had passed, and more than 600 people had died in battle. Less than 200 of them had died in the explosion. The rest had died in the hands of that bastard. Now that they thought of that bastard, they gritted their teeth. If they could catch him, they would skin him alive even if they had to sacrifice their lives. Behind this was the fear in everyone's hearts. Even the army reinforcements that came last were tongue-tied and felt a chill down their spines when they found out about what had happened. At this time, the orders from above had also changed. Previously, they had to capture him alive, but later, they tried to capture him alive. Now, they were to attack immediately upon sight as long as the corpses were left behind. "I'm hungry." Renbochin rubbed his stomach, which was growling. After arriving at this base, he had already snatched food 4 times, at least 30 kilograms of beef. However, he was still so hungry that his chest was sticking to his back. The food that entered his stomach was converted into essence blood and then essence chi that dispersed throughout his body, consumed along with his movements. Now that the canteens were stationed with troops, he definitely couldn't go there. Renbochin felt that if this went on, he would end up eating soil. He didn't know if his stomach could digest soil now. Renbochin sat in the dark, plucking grass from the ground and stuffing it into his mouth. It tasted worse than raw beef. Renbochin's face twitched, and his expression was extremely rich. Eat grass. I'm not an alpaca. Moreover, this thing was unpalatable and had no nutrition. It would turn into air once it entered his stomach. He had already pulled out a patch of grass, but it was still useless. She sighed faintly, her face full of grievance. Who did he offend? A person sitting in a carriage can cause trouble to fall from the sky. If Renbochin wanted to leave now, he could still find an opportunity. However, he was no longer in a hurry. Anyway, the night was still long. There was always an opportunity. He was prepared to make a big firecracker. After fighting for half a day, Renbochin felt that he had gained a lot. He was now able to drift, hide, search, and assassinate like a shadow in the darkness. Although they were only facing some elite soldiers from Earth. However, this was something that he couldn't do in the past. He didn't even think that he could do this. Although the experience this time was a little unfair, it was very valuable in terms of results. Especially in terms of combat and killing, he began to have his own experiences and ideas. People were forced to do so. In the current environment, Renbochin couldn't help but think about how to hide his whereabouts and how to fight. As a searchlight swept past, only a patch of bare grass was left. A group of soldiers rushed over with tactical flashlights and saw the bare grass on the ground. They immediately discovered something and said, "He has been here." However, at this moment, a metal chain suddenly swung out from the darkness and wrapped around the necks of two people. Ka-cha! Accompanied by the sound of bones breaking, the two people fell to the ground weakly. "He's here." The remaining people were horrified and immediately fired at the front while shouting. Renbochin flashed behind a tree and disappeared into the darkness. He avoided the other soldiers, took a detour, and appeared near a row of hangars, not far from the dock. Although there were soldiers patrolling and searching here, the number of soldiers was much smaller than in other places. Renbochin waited in the dark for more than 10 minutes. Then, he found a gap and used 5 seconds to cross 200 meters in front of him. He stuck to the shadow of the hangar, slowed down his breathing, and waited quietly until there was a gap before a searchlight swept past and the patrolling soldiers. He then jumped up and threw the metal chain to pull himself above the hangar. After that, he chased after the searchlight for a while until it drew an arc in front of him and turned in another direction. He then jumped to the ground in front of him, rolled over, and quickly ran to the dock. Then, he quickly took off his clothes and jumped into the sea. He didn't even leave his underpants on and held them up so that they wouldn't leave any water marks on his body when he got on the ship. His target was the ship by the sea. The largest warship looked like an aircraft carrier. Renbochin naturally didn't know that it was an amphibious assault ship. He just felt that it looked big and thought that it must have a powerful weapon on it. In fact, he had another target that looked like the enemy's headquarters. Unfortunately, there were too many soldiers around, and he had almost no chance to sneak in. Even if he rushed in, it wouldn't be easy to get out. Therefore, he settled for the next best thing, which was this warship that looked very valuable. He didn't know if the number of troops at the headquarters would decrease after blowing up this place. The people on the shore are still searching, but the entire base is actually in chaos because of one person. Is he a Superman? Or is he Batman? I can't believe that a normal person can do such a thing. Two soldiers stood near the side of the ship and vigilantly scanned all the positions on the dock. From time to time, they would look up at the chaos in the distance. Maybe he's Wonder Woman. The other person added. I like Wonder Woman's face and butt. That person immediately laughed. In any case, we have to be careful. Watch the shore and don't let him sneak in. Why not in the sea? Good man Richard is 18 meters above the water, which is equivalent to the height of a 6-story building. Can he fly up? Although it is said that he can jump very high, do you believe that someone can jump more than 10 meters from the water? In that case, I believe that he's Wonder Woman. The yellow-skinned Wonder Woman. I don't believe it. Swasherbow. 24 people were scattered in the dark, looking at the vehicles that were rushing to and fro. The lady boss is inside. What are we waiting for? Let's rush in and snatch her back. A burly man said in a low, muffled voice. He had a simple and honest face and a pair of small eyes that looked ferocious. Wait a moment. They are still searching everywhere, which means that Mr. Wren isn't in danger for the time being. His face was twitching. There were soldiers armed with live ammunition everywhere inside. According to the information they received, there were more than 10,000 of them. How could they rush in? Along the way, they had really worried themselves to death in order to appease these masters. If it wasn't for the fact that they couldn't beat them. Fine, they couldn't beat them. How could this group of people be so fierce? Thinking back to what they saw at the base, one of them sent a companion who was about the same strength as him flying with a slap as if he was swatting a fly. The thought of it made their hearts turn cold. However, they rather admired him for not being caught after such a long time despite being searched by more than 10,000 people. They didn't know how he did it. According to reliable sources, he had also killed many people. This made everyone admire him. Being able to kill so many people in the enemy's base while being searched by more than 10,000 people, he was simply a super ferocious person. However, even if he was a super ferocious person, under such circumstances, it was only a matter of time before he was caught. They had to find him before he was caught. It has nothing to do with whether he is in danger or not. The important thing is to snatch him back. Otherwise, if the boss finds out, he will skin us alive, another burly man said. That's right, a few others echoed. So what if Rinbochin was in danger? If he wasn't in danger, wouldn't they save him? What they needed to do now was to snatch the lady boss back, not to see whether she was in danger or not. Now that you have entered, do you know where your lady boss is? Furthermore, there are so many of you. I'm afraid that before you can find her, you will be turned into sieves, another man said. Pfft. A few burly men sneered. When I killed people, you guys were still in your mother's womb. I have even charged through an army of 100,000, let alone these few people. This sneer made the veins on the other men's foreheads pop. At this moment, a huge flame suddenly lit up at the pier in the distance. A ball of fire soared into the sky. Then, there were continuous sounds of explosions. This sound attracted everyone's attention. Then, all the soldiers ran to the pier like crazy. The lady boss is there. A burly man suddenly stood up and laughed. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.